April Getches. I'm the town manager for town of Timnath. So welcome everybody. I wanted to point out a few people. Brian Ronan from our city council, Paul Steinway from our city council, Erin Pearson from our city council, and I'm waiting for her to make a grand entrance. The mayor of Timnath. And we also have John Toronto, who's our town engineer, Matt Blakely and Brian Williamson on our planning staff, and Robert Rogers, who's our town attorney. So we almost outnumber you, but not quite. And there are some seats over here. But I want to, first of all, thank you very much for coming out this evening on a beautiful evening when you could be walking or doing something else. I also want to thank our panel before we get started once, and certainly we'll thank them at the end of the evening. They are doing this gratis. They are doing this because this is what they do, and it costs me dinner, and that in our kitchen.
These brownies are astounding.
Yes.
Amazing.
So anyway, I want to thank them very much for being here this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Patty Limerick, who's going to introduce the rest of the panel and start with the program. So thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you, and these are the best brownies I've ever had in my life. And so, saying we are uncompensated doesn't really address the quality of the brownies here. Thank you. So, I want to take a little bit to get started. I should say that we want to make sure that there's as much time as possible for your questions. So this is not a short evening, particularly. It might be as much as 2 hours if that's what you want, if that's what your questions are taking us in that direction. But first, a few remarks about us. I am the faculty director of the Center of the American West. I'm actually a Western American historian. I've been in Colorado for 30 years. And you might wonder how I got into this subject matter. The Center of the American West has the slogan, turning hindsight into foresight, and we try to use historical perspective to understand the issues and dilemmas of our time, and to a surprising degree that is actually useful and beneficial. So that's how I got into to this issue. We did our first publication called What Every Westerner Should Know About Energy in 2003, and we have been engaged in energy issues since then. Our society, I believe, is sadly understaffed when it comes to referees and umpires. So in many ways what I have moved into as an historian, thinking about the larger units of time in which we operate, but I have found myself enjoying, this seems like a curious thing, but I do enjoy very much being in the midst of what can be contentious issues and setting up some understandings of civility and how we will proceed in ways that I think are productive. So we have a Center of the American West commitment that that the people who came to an event came to hear the speakers, so everyone must be permitted to hear the speakers. That does not mean that you must hide your disagreement with the speaker, but what we ask you at the Center of the American West to practice is what we call respiratory protest. So if a speaker says something that you are not in agreement with, you may sigh with exasperation, you may snort with contempt, you may hiss, I suppose that's even possible, but you cannot keep your neighbor from hearing the speaker. In Greeley, when I said this, everybody hissed just to get that out of their system at that point. But that has been, I think, a good device, and also we always are careful to make sure that we, among ourselves and in all of our conversations, we are very receptive at the Center of the American West for any comments or criticisms or suggestions you care to make. We will hang out afterwards, as long as when the formal program is over, taking any suggestions you have for how we can do what we do better, and also any requests for information on subjects that we didn't cover tonight. Our stance is one of neutrality. We do not have a position on this issue, or really any other. We have a very strong commitment to acknowledging uncertainty, so we use this format: what we know, what we don't know, and what we hope to learn. We choose our speakers for an evening like this because they are knowledgeable, and we have seen them deploy that knowledge in clear and effective ways. And they've also proven themselves to be people who listen to questions and who actually hear those questions and respond to them directly, and who do not go defensive, which is not that common these days to be able to hold back on that character trait. We are proud of the fact that if you go to our website, centerwest.org, you will find a glossary that we have created of the essential terms of oil and gas development, and we have written up those terms and their definitions in a way that we hope will allow people to use terms of oil and gas development in productive conversations, exchanges, and debates. The author, I was a co-author, but the principal author is conspicuously young, and she is sitting over there, Adrienne Kretsch, a graduate student there, which gave her, because she is young, she has a nimbleness of mind when it comes to learning new terms and explaining them to others. But I'm also a co-author of that. We have a custom of written questions, and we do that because we like to have, we have a growing record of what citizens are interested in oil and gas. Through these written questions, we actually have a pretty good calibration of what topics are of interest to citizens. And also we have an efficiency with that. So our custom is that Center of the American West folks, that's Chris and Ashley and Kurt and Emily, they will walk around starting in 15 or 20 minutes. You have little forms for writing questions. They will have those. Excellent. Questions are beginning already, so that will keep us lively and nimble and active. The Center of the American West people collect those and sort those so that we can clump them, and that, I think, gets us through a remarkable number of questions. We may not get through all, but we are able to get a lot more in that way by having the written form and clumping them and putting them together. There are many technical matters that we'll be speaking of tonight that deserve our attention, but this issue has, I think everyone in the room is well aware of this, moved also into the zone of human relations, that there is something of a crisis of trust in this terrain. Government, industry, and experts are not always in moments of harmony, and let's just say it's well short of a group hug in that mode right now. So we do not have any notion that we will be builders of trust across those boundaries, but we do believe that we can host events and programs where people can deliberate and in civil and respectful ways and learn more about each other as well as about this subject. So our format is going to be interview. I have attended several billion conferences over my lifetime, and I have lost enthusiasm for it. Now we're each going to make statements of 15 minutes in length, and now we've run out of time for conversation, and so we'll have to go home now. So I reject that format now, and instead want to go into the format of interview and conversation. Our experts will speak without my interrupting them for little spells and chunks, but it will be a conversation or dialogue. We've circulated topics and questions beforehand. I think I've done this with just about everybody who's up here. So it'll be 15 or 20 minutes with each person, and then a few minutes of them speaking among themselves. And at that point, we'll then turn to your questions. So, ready? Ready? Great. Okay. So we have each person will begin with my question of what got you to this seat at this table. What is it that you do that got you up here with us? And each of you will have some version. That's better than me reading your resume, which you can actually read in your program. So what brings you here tonight?
I am the Chief Operating Officer of Synergy Resources Corporation. Synergy is a Weld County-based oil and gas operator. We take it from the infancy of literally knocking on doors after we run title to leasing the mineral rights from the mineral owner, through the state permit process, the surface use. If it's in a municipality, we go through the use by special review. Some towns and cities use other terms for that, but you not only have to attain, if you're in a municipal area that's annexed and or city town proper, you not only have to attain the state permit, but you have to attain a use by special permit from the respective municipality. Synergy started in 2008. Our CEO and one of the we have co-CEOs now. They've been business partners for over 30 years in Weld County, Colorado only. One's from Commerce City originally, went to school there and went and got both his degrees at CU. The other's from Fort Morgan. Ed Holloway is actually a Timnath resident. Ed Holloway is a gentleman who has had 3 different private companies, oil and gas, in Weld County. Over the last 30 years, he's seen the renaissance of this development from vertical wells that were single-stage completions, single-stage fracks, to directional wells where you could start drilling closer to municipalities, closer to schools, closer to homes, closer to commercial properties, because you could drill down and out and down into the formation and complete that well and have it produce, to the renaissance that we've seen in the last 24 to 36 months of this horizontal drilling that is bringing up more minerals, more oil and gas than we've ever known in Weld County, Colorado. Synergy's niche, I started in 2008, was on the directional wells, was really picking up leases in Greeley proper. We have drilled and operated wells today of the 300 wells that we have, and we're growing. We're drilling with 3 drilling rigs right now. We're growing at a rate where we'll add another 70 wells a year horizontally. But we've drilled in 12 different municipalities, from Erie to Meade to Berthoud, Johnstown, Milliken, Severance, Windsor. We're in Severance right now, actually. Is off of County Road 19, just a half mile north of County Road 70 is where our drilling rig was. And now we're there with Halliburton today, completing those wells over about a 10-day period of time. So I think obviously our knowledge and our existence of our company, working not only on what we call the low-hanging fruit, the easy wells, the wells that are drilled in the corner of some gentleman's farm, and we're not within 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 feet from the nearest neighbor, and we're really not a nuisance to anybody, with the operations and the traffic that is enhanced for the period of time of drilling and completion, to wells that we drilled. We drilled 4 wells just recently, 600 feet southeast of District 6 football stadium in the city of Greeley. And those wells go under 2 different subdivisions, and we have nearly 1,000 mineral owners, because each of those quarter-acre to 10th-acre lots had their minerals for us to be able to drill that 320-acre unit. So I think what brought us here is the fact of, one, we're a very transparent operator. If I don't know the answer tonight, I will certainly be willing to give you my business card and we can have dialogue after, or I will find a way to get the answer back to you. But we're just a local group of people. We all live here. I live in Windsor. My kids go to school in Windsor. We lived in Greeley before we moved to Windsor, and the first 7 wells that we drilled with Synergy Resources was 800 feet behind my house. And I had the minerals, still have the minerals, I'm still in that house. But it's a process where, to me, and one of the reasons that I love Patty's approach and any other opportunities to get out into the public, is to really tell you from an operator what we do, how we do it, and try to educate on our side of the story, if you will, and make sure that we put the facts out there so you can make yourself a good, sound decision on your position on this topic.
Okay, could you, with incredible efficiency, could you walk us through an overview of the process of well drilling, fracking, production, long-term site management and restoration? Your efficiency is going to be stunning.
When you bring a drilling rig on location, we usually have anywhere from 6 to 12 wells that we're drilling with the spacing that we have now in a 320, 640 acre spacing, no matter how, and I could bore you with the details on how we arrived to that. We drill with the drilling rig, and this is required by the state, and it's regulated and monitored by the state. They check it, and they check you oftentimes after the process once you're in production. We drill a 12¼ inch hole to 200 to 300 feet below the deepest aquifer. So they test all the wells within a mile, water wells within a half mile to a mile radius, depending upon where you're at, how many wells are there. And we'll know that from all the water wells within Weld County what the deepest aquifer is. The state documents that as you apply for your permit. They approve that part of your permit. There's many, many steps to your permit. So that is drilled, 12¼ inch hole. You run a 9 5/8 inch steel casing in there, and you cement it back to surface. From there, we run an 8 inch bit that goes down, it's 8 5/8 actually, but goes down to what is called our TVD, our total vertical depth, which in this case, in this basin, is anywhere from 7,200 to 7,500 feet for the formations that we're drilling to. So you've got your casing, you cement your casing, and then you run another 7-inch pipe as you drill that hole to where the formation is like an ocean down there. It's an ebb and flow, and you want to land that 7-inch pipe at a 90-degree angle. So you're drilled on a curve and it lands there, and that is all cased back with 7-inch pipes. So now you've got cement, 9 5/8-inch casing, cement, 7-inch casing. From there we come back with a 6-inch bit and we drill our lateral out, which is the length, which is usually, the standard is a 4,000 to 4,500 feet, so a 1 mile long lateral. From there, that's a 4-inch pipe, and that's cemented back. So at the surface, you'll have cement, casing, all the way through with three levels, again, above all those aquifers. Once that casing is out there and it's cemented in to the end of the well, and you've got it plugged at the end also, we come back with a wire line, which is simply that. It's a wire that goes down and shoots electric charges where we perf holes into that steel casing. And that's where the fracturing of the rock happens. You're in a formation that is a sandstone, it's a tight rock. The geologists and the engineers that are a lot smarter than I am liken it to the sidewalks, a little softer than the sidewalks that we walk on. That's what the oil and gas, natural gas, is trapped behind within these natural fractures and faults. So we have to go ahead for about 150 feet at the end of that lateral that we've drilled. We shoot charges, 4 of them every foot, for about 150 feet in clusters, and then we bring the rig, the fracking crew in, and you put sand and water and some chemical, depending upon the design of your frac. A lot of that chemical, we use mostly slick water fracs. I'm not here to tell you that we don't use fracs that have other chemical compound in it, but we like the slick water fracs, one, because they're a little cheaper, and two, we haven't seen the great results that the hybrid fracs that have a perm stem or a phaser in it, which is the chemical that helps keep the sand and keeps those fractures propped open. But you're forcing down that pipe now 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of pressure, and you're putting about 1,000 pounds of sand into that rock per foot. So if you have 150 feet, now we put 150,000 pounds of sand, and the water is the transporter that helps you do that. Then you go ahead, after that stage has been fracked, you shut it down, under pressure, you go and you put a plug in there, and you come back and you do it multiple times. We usually do it anywhere from 20 to 26 times in a lateral. We will frack that well, break that rock. Those fractures can go out 300 to 500 feet is what the tracers that we've looked at. We've never put a tracer in, but we've participated in wells with the bigger operators that have traced the fractures to see where they go. From there, after the well's been completed, all stages have been completed, we come back with wireline because you have to drill those plugs out. And once you drill those out, everything flows back to you. The water that you've put into that well, about 20% of it will come back. So a lot of that water, if you're in an area where you have operations nearby that needs water, whether it's for drilling or other completions going forward, a lot of times we recycle it on location and pipe it to the next. When that doesn't happen, it goes to an injection well, and it gets trucked to the injection well. So if you're going to see flowback water. These reservoirs produce both oil and natural gas. The natural gas is the transporter. 95% of the wells in Weld County, you don't see a pump jack on it. The ones you see when you drive down I-25 or if you drive out towards Briggsdale, those are what we call lower GOR, gas to oil ratio areas. And you need the pump because you've got the minerals down there and the liquid's in your well bore, but it doesn't have the horsepower of the natural gas to lift it for you. So that does not happen very often. We've got plenty of natural gas in these reservoirs. A well will go ahead. The vertical wells that were drilled in the 1980s, everyone thought they were 10 to 12-year wells. If you remember from the 80s to the 90s, oil went from $7 a barrel to 17 to 30. So a well that in early 1990s, it was still only doing 2 or 3 barrels a day, was still very economical for an operator to operate. So the wells that were drilled in the 80s, a lot of them are still here today. My concern in the industry, and I think something that the horizontal drilling is really, and I'll get off the soapbox here in a second.
Did I invite you into a soapbox?
No. There's one thing that keeps me up at night in the industry, and that's wells that were drilled in the 80s, because they don't
That's an interesting soapbox.
the cement and casing integrity that today's wells do. The technology back there was not the same, how you monitor those. So those are the ones that concern me for braiding head tests, for backside emissions coming out of those wells. The equipment that is on location is not to today's standards. The technology of today's production equipment is so much better than it was in the 1980s. But what's happening is with this renaissance of horizontal drilling, the state will not allow you to complete wells in a unit that has those older wells because they don't have the integrity. So you're going to see an unbelievable renaissance. Out of the 17,000 wells in Weld County that were drilled 80s and 90s, the state, everyone estimates that about 10,000 of those will be plugged and abandoned over the next 3 to 5 years for the horizontal development. Oil prices that were at 100 a couple of weeks ago are lingering in the 80s now. It's very economical for operators to still do that. Obviously, it's a commodity that our country is deeply in love with. Most of us use it. Well, we all use it. We're all wearing it. It's in the detergents we have. It's in the vehicles we drive for the most part. So it's something that until our country finds a way to integrate alternate opportunities, this is where we need to be, obviously.
Could you, now, well, that was very efficient, and that was a good soapbox, so.
Thank you.
Thinking of the questions of those older wells, could you walk us through the actions and precautions that operators can take to reduce or eliminate the risk of groundwater contamination or atmospheric emissions? And could you, if you choose to, say which are frequently used, which could be used more often, what might be the obstacles to all of those precautions, I guess?
I would say all of the operators in Weld County, and this, again, this renaissance of this drilling and the value of the minerals because of the ability to extract so much more with this new technology. It's not new technology, it's the commodity price has enhanced the technology, and so you've always been able to drill horizontal wells. It's just the fact that $100 oil got it excited and got it motivated. The state requires us to contain 95% of our emissions on a location. We feel like all of our locations are closer to 98 to 100%. We have a third party, it's a group out of Fort Collins, CGRS, incredible group of people that they not only test our groundwater on certain locations, a lot of municipalities will require that of us, or we will offer it, and then we do periodic testing after. But they've implemented for us a FLIR camera program, which is forward-looking infrared camera. So every location within all of our inventory, every 90 days they go out with this camera and they will shoot the wellhead, they will shoot the tanks, they'll shoot the separators, they'll shoot vapor recoveries and the compressor. And what the naked eye can't see, if there's gas or something emitting from there, this camera will show it to you. We do that on all of our locations every 90 days. If it's municipal, if we're within a municipality, we do it every 30 days. Now that's an added expense that our company just feels that's our cost of doing business to be a safe and operate in the community that we live in, operate in a way that we want our kids, our neighbors, everybody to be safe. Technology is getting better and better. We are seeing all kinds of different companies and new patents on ways to control your emissions, hopefully to 100%. We liken a well that's at 98%, and it's run, if it's, not all wells run 24 hours a day. They do for probably the first 6 to 10 months, and then they run on cycles as the pressure builds up in the reservoir, and they will cycle at a certain pressure, and they will dump the oil at that point in time and sell the gas down the gas line at that point in time. We liken it to a car sitting on your location idling if you're at 98%. The state comes by all the time, periodically checks on you. They check for your wellhead for braiding head test. They take out the forward-looking infrared camera. If you have a violation, it is an automatic $7,500 fine, no questions asked. We have been fined. Out of our 300 wells, I think we've been fined 3 times. One was You have these combustors on location that burn the gases off the tanks, and if your pilot light is not lit, it's automatic, because if the well cycles and your pilot light's not lit, it can't burn the emissions. So that 2 of our 3 fines were for that, and one was just another thief hatch where you have a valve on top of your tank and it was leaking, and we didn't have it up to speed. We have all of our field personnel, which are all, again, all local people, are trained in this. We also brought a forward-looking infrared camera recently in the last 6 months in-house to where our field people have it, so if CGRS catches something, we can go out, remediate it, and shoot it ourselves immediately to make sure, within 24 hours, to make sure that it's up to par, so you can go ahead and keep producing that location. Groundwater-wise, again, the wells that were drilled in the 80s are my bigger concern. Is today's pipe and these poly pipes and the steel pipe and the way it's wrapped and coated is a lot different than just putting a steel pipe in the ground like they did that's going to rust over time in the 80s. Again, I think obviously when you read, I don't know if those of you get the Greeley Tribune, or you can go online, you read the spill reports that are the other operators. We've been in there one time. We had a valve stick open on a tank after a oil hauler he didn't close it all the way, and we had less than 5 barrels, but it still was a reportable incident. In fact, it was actually New Year's Day last year. Long story short, when you read those, probably 70% of them are historic. It's something where the piping underground on an older well has failed, and they caught it through a test to make sure that it's operating properly, and when it's not, you report to the state this has happened, and you go from there. Some of the municipalities that we're operating in do require us to test groundwater prior to. The wells that are in Greeley are just about 300 feet from the sheep draw slough that feeds the Poudre River. So we stepped up and said we would test that prior to, after, and then every 6 months after for the first 3 years, and then yearly after that, just to put the city of Greeley and the residents nearby at ease that we weren't contaminating the sheep draw slough in any way, shape, or form. So.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes, and 1 minute will be for trust and community relations and the best approaches for that. And the second, well, actually the first minute will be for what happens to a site after production, and what is the long-term maintenance plan, because you've been very eloquent about the problems of the wells in the 1980s, so what is the longer-term management strategy? So that's your first minute, of which I'm taking a little bit too much of your time there, and then a quick statement on trust, and we can return to that with audience questions as well.
But I mean, the locations that we're operating today, things that are newly drilled anywhere in the last 3 to 5 years, and going forward, we have boots on the ground on a daily basis. All operators do. You also have automation on your locations. That's, again, the advances in technology. If there's a pressure change on a wellhead, or a tank pressure's up for some reason, or a separator's failing, it automatically shuts the location in. It sends me a text message. It sends my 6 field guys a text message. We know immediately that there's a situation there. You know, again, I think I mentioned earlier, 17,000 wells in Weld County, and fortunately, I think, and that's a tribute to the industry, is we're not reading about big instances. Yes, there was an instance that was a human error instance right down the road here with PDC Energy, who's a very, very reputable, very good operator, and it was simply a gentleman was not following protocol and brought a boom of a lift over and dropped a piece of equipment on a wellhead and snapped the wellhead, and now this well with pressure behind it's free flowing, and that had the spill that everyone read about 18 months ago, I think it was. We have protocols in line. Everyone has protocols. You don't ever put a boom over the top of a wellhead. You know, fencing. We have audio, and not audio, visual cameras on some of our locations that are in more high traffic areas. My worry, people always ask me what keeps me up at night. My worry is more a sabotage type thing, where someone's trying to make the industry look bad and goes out and hurts themselves because they don't know what they're doing around the wellhead, but tries to go ahead and mess with equipment. So fencing and being secure with those are obviously of the utmost importance. What was your other question?
We will return to it.
Okay.
Audience, right, questions about communications and trust and transparency and responsiveness, because we'll have a chance to get back to that. Okay, so Teresa, I think we have you up next. And your first question is what brings you here and what is your background that gets you a seat at tables like this?
Well, I'm actually a fourth-generation Coloradan. I grew up in the Front Range, Wheat Ridge area. Went to school in Fort Collins. I have family still in the Denver area, and a sister lives in Severance, actually. So this is my home. I currently live in Grand Junction, and I've been there for about 16 years. I kind of took a U-turn. I went from CSU down to Albuquerque and then up to the Western Slope, back to Colorado. I'm a medical researcher by training. I have a PhD in immunology and epidemiology. Interestingly enough, the first epidemiological study I worked on was a study of, I don't think I ever told you this, Patty, of the impact of Agent Orange on Vietnam-era veterans and the people who actually worked in the factories that made the compound known as Agent Orange. But I'm a cancer researcher. I've studied respiratory diseases, done a lot of occupational health work in, most recently, in the mining and mineral extraction arena. Initially with coal and copper and uranium mining and mine workers, and more recently having to do with natural gas here in Colorado. I also served for 8 years on the Grand Junction City Council, was the mayor of Grand Junction for a period of time, and have a passion for public policy. And as a scientist, have a passion for how do we apply science to public policy, and how do we understand science in a rational and reasonable way and apply it to public policy, rather than knee-jerk and fear reactions that seem to be so much of our headlines these days. I teach at Colorado Mesa University as an adjunct professor, teaching bioethics and epidemiology and a number of other things, environmental health and environmental sciences. So I come to this table, I guess, with some background in the topic that we're all interested in, some experience living on the Western Slope in the middle of the boom and more recent bust of natural gas operations, and just a real passion for public information and public policy.
And I think maybe you should add just a word or two about your Garfield County study.
Sure.
Folks will want to know that.
While my first position in Grand Junction was this as the senior scientist of the Sacramento Research Institute, which was part of St. Mary's Hospital. And one of the studies I was involved in and was the primary investigator for was a study of community health in Garfield County, looking at the relationship of the natural gas industry to the community and to community health. And this was a point-in-time baseline study. This actually predated the Colorado School of Public Health study that you may have read about. And we took the approach of looking at the health of residents of Garfield County, comparing that to the residents of Mesa, Delta, and Montrose counties, to see if there were any obvious differences in various aspects of health among the residents who were most closely exposed and related to the natural gas industry operations, as opposed to people who had similar lifestyles, similar demographics, and did not have that close relationship with the natural gas industry. It was, as I say, a point-in-time study, and so we were hoping to establish a baseline of community health, which I think we did fairly well. It was not a study of causation. In other words, we were not looking for ways of actually attributing specific health issues and specific exposures related to the natural gas industry. I will tell you, we didn't see anything in this very descriptive study that popped out and raised lots of questions. Some kind of interesting things we learned about the health of lots of people on the Western Slope that maybe we hadn't known before. For example, we realized and actually helped alert the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment that we were having an epidemic of or an increase in venereal disease in all 4 of the counties we studied that they weren't aware of.
Some of them weren't aware of it.
Yeah, or they weren't really paying a lot of attention to it. And one of the things that, you know, we did see some increases in respiratory conditions, or reported respiratory conditions, visits to the hospital for asthma, allergies, that sort of thing. The problem with epidemiologic studies like this and trying to make conclusions about what causes a certain health effect is that most, or many, I should say, conditions like exacerbations of asthma or respiratory disease can have many causes. And because the symptoms are very similar, and it's very difficult often to attribute a particular cause to what you're seeing. And so what we were not able to do in that study was to then go back and say, you know, were there differences in meteorologic conditions in the community? Was it an especially high pollen season that we happened to pick as a point in time? Were there other kinds of issues that might have caused air pollution problems like wildfires at the time, other than what we knew was the operation of the natural gas industry and the possibility of emissions from those operations that could admittedly cause respiratory problems. So that was the study I was involved in, and it is available actually on the Garfield County Health Department's website to this day if you're interested in looking at it. The whole full study is about 300 pages. I think the executive summary is about 30 pages. So, but it was an interesting way of taking a look at issues and concerns, not of the people in the community. And so we also looked at what were the concerns that people had, whether or not we could attribute them to any actual health outcomes. And as an epidemiologist and a scientist, I believe completely that people's concerns are just as important as any hard data that we have, that there's a relationship with problems in health. We know that when people are concerned, you see increases in stress levels, and that can be attributed or contribute to physical problems, but it also means that there's something that we as scientists, we as policymakers need to pay attention to and deal with, because perception is often reality, and the well-being of a community is dependent on people feeling comfortable about their environments. So the other thing I didn't mention as far as what gets me to this table, and that you all should know, is that I spent 7 years as a member of the state Air Quality Control Commission, and was very involved in the most recent, well, the 2007 and last year's new regulations around the oil and gas industry and air emissions. So one of the things I would say about that, and Craig mentioned the impact of some of those regulations and the things that they have to do to comply as an industry, is that this is a response on the part of policymakers to take the precautionary principle, if you will, when we don't really know all the facts, we don't really know what the relationships are or could be. It's very often a good response to say, let's maybe go a little beyond or do what we can to protect public health, even if we're not absolutely certain that what we're trying to regulate is causing a problem. And I believe that we did that in the state, and Craig talked a lot about changes in technology over the last couple of decades. We've also seen concomitant with that changes in public policy and regulations, both in terms of regulations of water and regulations of air quality, that have been a response to try and protect public health to the best of our knowledge and scientific basis at this point in time.
I just would like to use your presence here. This is something I have added to my own presentations recently, because I realized by not saying this, I was leaving confusion. If I said it is hard to prove negative health impacts and stop there. I could have confusion ricochet out from that. So what I am now saying, I hope you will be a close critic of this statement, failing to prove that negative health impacts are occurring is not the same thing as providing definitive proof that they do not exist or will ever exist.
Absolutely, absolutely.
When I haven't said that, I've left confusion in my wake. So a public health expert has signed off on my statement. I can tell you the peace of mind.
Right. Just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean it can't exist.
Or just because that particular study didn't show that it exists.
Right. I think the
So
other thing.
perception is not just a paranoid reaction if you
Absolutely
were.
not.
No, okay.
Absolutely not. I think the other thing that we need to recognize as public health officials or scientists is that we're not one homogeneous population. All of us have different susceptibilities and reactions to things that are in our environment. So our public policy is generally aimed at, whether it's the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency or the state public health agencies or your county agencies, is aimed at protecting, to the best that we understand, the most vulnerable among us. So we know that people who, for example, young children, elderly people with health problems, other people with certain underlying health problems are going to be more sensitive, if you will, or more susceptible to things in the environment that could cause health problems. Things that may not affect in any way, shape, or form a healthy adult. So we aim to try and protect those who are most vulnerable among us. On the other hand, we don't always know what the limits of that sensitivity might be. So we try and err on the side of caution. On the other hand, we also know that there are economic, and I think we're going to hear more about that, and ultimately, if you think of the health of a community, impacts on our community if we never take any risks whatsoever, because there is not a risk-free society. We can't achieve that. It's impossible, or not one we want to live in anyway, because then we don't have any benefits as well. So we have, as a society, we choose our risks and benefits.
So you put so many of the pieces out here already, but could you do the same exercise in efficiency, but on the subject that I asked of Craig, but what is the present state of knowledge of health impacts for residents in proximity to and workers in the oil and gas development?
Well, I have to say that unlike many other extractive industries, uranium, for example, or coal, there aren't as many studies, health studies out there. We don't know as much as we have learned over the years about the risks to uranium workers, for example, or underground coal miners and that sort of thing. We do know that natural gas operations at various points in their processes can potentially emit harmful substances into the air or potentially into the water. And we know something about what those compounds might do if you are exposed to them by breathing the material or ingesting the material. Most of the studies about the hazards of any particular chemical compound are done first in laboratory animals, and then we may learn some things from studies in workers, because workers are generally, not always, but generally, you might say the canary in the coal mine, in that they are more likely to be exposed to high doses of whatever the dangerous compound is. So we often look to occupational studies to tell us what the physical impact might be of exposure to something. The general public is generally exposed to a lower dose than a worker might be. And dose in epidemiologic studies is hugely important. We know that just because a material can be harmful doesn't mean that it will be harmful. It depends on how much of that material gets into your body, how it gets into your body, your natural sensitivity to that material, and there has to be a logical exposure pathway. In other words, you have to be exposed to the material for it to be hazardous to you. That seems obvious, but we often fear things that are in our environment, whether or not we're actually running the risk of being exposed to them. Ebola virus is a good example right now in the news. So, so unfortunately for natural gas, we know a lot about the compounds that are in the air, but we don't have a lot of data on community studies on people, or workers actually, being exposed to the materials. Our study was one of the first. There have been there are several ongoing in this region right now in the state. The EPA has very recently done some studies, particularly looking at fracking fluids, and there have been some air quality studies that have been done. But a lot of what we know, or we've based our public policy on, is an extrapolation, if you will, of what we project some of those dangers might be, without a lot of hard facts at this point in time.
So I have ended up really happy that I didn't become a public health scholar, because I think that is probably the area of greatest interest and concern and the hardest to communicate. And you seem like a cheerful person. You just seem like a cheerful person. That's a good thing to see someone so resilient and cheerful under that. So you have conditions, well, you have a science which seems to be originated in laboratories and controlled experiments.
Right, right.
You will never have a controlled experiment. Or will you have a controlled? How do you take the fact that people move around? You cannot. Teresa Kuntz cannot decree this population will live here for 20 years. They will have medical exams every 6 months. They will breathe. We'll keep fans blowing in a consistent way. So
putting people in chambers where we expose you to a certain amount of benzene over a certain period of time.
That would go over well,
which we would do with animals. Yeah, it's a big difficulty, and so we extrapolate a lot of information. And we run, well, a couple of problems with epidemiologic health studies and connecting a health issue or problem, a diagnosis in an individual, with an exposure that might have caused that problem. First of all, most people are concerned about cancer. I used to be a cancer researcher, and I know that that's, the big C is the big fear for an awfully lot of people. And so we study cancer rates a lot. And unfortunately, I'm probably like most of the public, when you hear that a friend or loved one has cancer, and the first thing you do is you start thinking about, well, what about me is like that person? Or what about me is not like that person? Okay, I don't smoke, I don't, so you can kind of feel more comfortable about your risk. We can tell you as epidemiologists the probability or the risk, the statistic that says what your risk might be based on who you are, your lifestyle, how old you are, where you live, that sort of thing. We can never tell you for sure whether you as an individual will develop a particular cancer. That's a game of Russian roulette. Where was I going with this? But
I'm hoping you'll go to having to communicate in probabilities.
Right. So it's very difficult. We talk about probabilities. We talk about you have a 1 out of 100,000 chance of developing something. The question we all ask then is, what does that really mean for me? Because if I'm that one person, that's a serious problem. If I'm if I'm not, then I'm free and clear. But we all base our decisions, unfortunately, on those probabilities, on where we want to live, what occupation we want to have, what public policy we make, that sort of thing. But it's very difficult to link that cause and effect. The other thing is, all of us bring with us a lifetime of exposures. And whether we move to this area from somewhere else, whether we lived here all our lives, we're exposed to things in our daily lives all the time that could cause some disease or another. And many of those things are synergistic or multiply your risk. So they compound things. And we all have a little bit of a different history there. So again, it's hard to say that that one exposure you had in your life is going to be the one that caused the cancer, because it could be a multiple of things. The other problem is population size. When we do our studies that give us that probability of your risk, we base that on usually very large populations. Most good epidemiologic studies involve hundreds of thousands of people. And the reason for that is because that gives us an experience across a wide base of people so that we can refine that probability decision. When we try and study a community of 100,000 people or several thousand people, we have a very skewed population, and we can't get good numbers or rational statistics out of that. So we may get the wrong answer, basically, about what any one individual's exposure is or risk is. We hear a lot sometimes in the newspaper about people doing, because they're very passionate people and they're very interested in these risks, somebody goes out and draws blood on 20 or 30 people and they find a high level of benzene, for example, in those people's blood, and they say, well, they live in this community where they have this certain exposure that could elevate their benzene level. But unfortunately, because they don't have a good control group, people who've never had those exposures, they really don't know what the history of those individuals would be or what else in their environment or in their history could have caused that high benzene level. You can often come up with the wrong answer and draw the conclusion that the risk is something that's very obvious in the environment that could be a potential problem. So those kinds of studies are very dangerous because they often lead us to the wrong conclusion or heighten our level of fear without a rational scientific basis.
Okay, so the last question here is that listening to all the complexities of your field, one might think that the best advice to the public is basically for public health people to say, oh, pay no attention to us, or come back to us in 20 years or 50 years. But how would you phrase pay attention to us, but in these particular ways or with these particular guidelines?
Yeah, we can't say come back to us in 20 or 30 or 40 years. We know that cancers, for example, have a 20-year latent period, probably. And so the data that we get on cancers today probably isn't relevant to what we're going to see in the community 20 years from now, when that risk is fully developed. But we can't stop. We can't stop either our lives and the things that are driving our economies, and we have to make decisions on the basis of the best knowledge we have available today. We have to weigh our risks and benefits, and that's why people who make public policy, that's why the health people, the US EPA and others tend to err, if you will, on the side of caution, because that's the best of the knowledge at the time, and we say we need to protect those who are vulnerable among us and use the best science we have. But that's why things change. That's why you'll see that the US EPA is constantly, every 10 years or so, reviewing their regulations and what's the new science, and should we decrease, or you rarely ever see them decrease it, but increase our standards for safety, because we know that science keeps going, we keep learning things, but we can't stop. We've got to make a decision today for the benefit of our community.
Howard, we will shift to Howard here, and you have the same opening question as everyone else. How did you get to this table, and what is the background that led you to be speaking? Excuse me, to be speaking on this subject.
So I'm the lawyer on the panel, for better or for worse. And my story is that I was a lawyer in private practice in Denver with a law firm there, and then in 1992 I joined a company called Basin Exploration, which was very active in drilling in Weld County. And that was my introduction to these issues. Until that point, I had been sort of involved in transactions and sort of the intellectual aspects of oil and gas law. Oil and gas is my specialty, mostly representing operators and producers. But I joined Basin, which was then a little company but growing rapidly, and I was quickly immersed in what I discovered was a war. It primarily centered in Weld County. I'm sure there are many of you here in this room who remember some of what was going on then. There was an organization called the Front Range Land and Mineral Owners. that were up in arms. They were mostly farmers and ranchers, mostly surface owners. Many of them didn't own minerals. And they were being run wild over. You know, Craig talks about the risks from some of these older wells from the 80s. What was going on in Weld County, primarily in Weld County, and there were areas kind of spilling out from there, but the epicenter was in Weld County, was craziness. It was companies drilling wells as fast as they could get bits in the ground. The practices were shoddy. They didn't pay much attention to the interests of surface owners. They drilled on crops. They just showed up and started drilling without any advance notice. Sort of the epitome of what was going, and I should preface that by saying, and Patty, I'm sort of launching into the second part of my presentation of how I got here into the substance of what I'm actually talking about and the history of some of this. A lot of this was tax credit driven. There were tax credits under the legislation that deregulated pricing on natural gas. It deregulated some categories, including gas from so-called tight rock or tight sands. You got a tax credit if you could produce it. And the Codell and Niobrara formations are very tight rock. And so what made it economic was to get these tax credits. You would drill into this tight rock with these vertical wells. They would produce, you'd get this flush production, and you'd get tax credits that would make that economic, but then the wells would fall off quickly, so you had to keep drilling to keep it going. It was a pretty difficult atmosphere, and I joined this company, and we're drilling these wells, and I had to try to help figure out how do we keep our company in business, because there was such an uproar. Potential legislation that came up over and over again in the legislature to protect surface owners, and to do something. The Oil and Gas Commission at the time wasn't really that much more, I describe it as a sort of a traffic cop. They were like making sure people were going in the right direction here and there. They were getting their permits, but they didn't really see themselves as having the job of actively regulating this kind of conduct by the industry. But they became more and more concerned as these practices proliferated. The epitome, Patty's heard me talk about this, was when, some of you may remember this, when one of the operators staked a well in a schoolyard in, I think it was in Greeley. It was an elementary school, and they just staked the well, not occurring to them that you shouldn't be drilling a well actually in a schoolyard. Turned out to be the Montfort's kids' school. So that well was never drilled, but it sort of highlighted, like, what are we doing here? This is craziness. That led, in the mid-90s, 1994, to the first regulatory overhaul of the Oil and Gas Commission, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But I wanted to go back. You asked me how I got here. I spent the next several years working with that company in the midst of all this, trying to get a handle on what was going on, and then trying to work toward improving the regulatory environment, weeding out the bad actors, so that the responsible actors, when we thought we were one of them, could flourish and could conduct their business without being in jeopardy of actually being forced out of business by the uproar over what everyone else was doing. So that's kind of how I got into this. I was with that company until 2001. We sold out of the DJ actually to one of our competitors. At the time, in the mid-90s, the tax credits ended. So the activity started to decrease. Gas prices basically went through the floor, and so the activity, drilling activity, slowed down, and industry started to develop a bit of an understanding with the local communities. Some of the worst operators got weeded out, but activity levels slowed down, and there began to be sort of this, I don't want to say rapprochement, but the local communities and industry started to learn how to live with each other. Then I sort of left that company. We sold that company, and I was in-house with another company that was not active here, and then I went back into private practice. So I've been practicing oil and gas law now for a long time. I've seen it from the inside. And it has fascinated me, just like you're fascinated with the adaptation of policy to science, or science to policy. For me, it's how do you develop rational public policy around this kind of activity, which definitely has an impact on people's lives, and can be done poorly, can be done properly. We in law school learn all about these ancient rules of capture. They used to analogize drilling for oil and gas to capturing wild animals. And if you could capture that beast, if you could capture that oil and gas, it was yours. And so you saw around the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, Spindletop in East Texas. If you go back and look at these old pictures of derricks right next to each other, because every property owner wanted to make sure they could get their share, they could dip their straw in that reservoir and get their share before their neighbor could. The result was you prematurely depleted a lot of these reservoirs because you let the pressure out. And that led to, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the development of oil and gas commissions that regulated how many wells could be drilled so that you could produce economically from reservoirs. It's a fascinating history and a fascinating business with lots of elements of property law and contract law and how people live together. And you combine these things with split estates, with different ownership of the surface than with the minerals. You add this regulatory environment, you add now fast-growing communities that are growing out to areas where there used to be maybe just farmland, and I know many of you are farmers, and you'd say, just farmland, it's my land. But as Craig pointed out, in many cases you could drill wells out there without having much of an impact on people, on dense communities. And so there just wasn't much of attention paid to these impacts of oil and gas development in communities. That's changing now. And Patty's going to ask me to recount some of the history, which I'm happy to do. There's so much to talk about. I thought I would at least give you a bit of a sense of how the basic law on oil and gas, the basic oil and gas law, preemption law in Colorado got established, if that's the direction you want me to go in.
I mean, you actually gone through a number of the questions I had here. I just wanted to have you speak a little bit more about what you were hinting at there, of what it means to have industrial sites appearing in areas that really had, where the residents had other visions of what their...
Well, you know, that's a really interesting question, because in some ways, and Patty, you've heard me on this before, it's deja vu all over again, because this has been occurring in Colorado for 100 years or more. We've had many of these towns grew up around the mining and even oil and gas industry. There were wells. The Boulder oil field is, 100 years old. So this is not new. There are some aspects of this that are new. And you've got many people who are moving into these communities, these fast-growing communities, who did not grow up around oil and gas. And the idea that there could be a drilling rig a few hundred feet away drilling a well near them is something that they couldn't in their wildest dreams have imagined. Let alone the fact if you only own the surface and you don't own the minerals and you have no control over what somebody does on your property, to come on your property and drill a well. That's a tough thing for people to swallow, even if, yeah, they knew when they bought their property, they only bought the surface, but people don't necessarily put all these things together. So you've got that, the political climate has changed. You've got the whole uproar over fracking, which, you could spend a whole evening talking about fracking, and we probably will. But it really only came into the public lexicon a few years ago, even though wells have been fracked in the industry for 60 years. And that in turn was driven by the advent of these shale plays, drilling into this really hard rock that Craig described, drilling these horizontal wells, 4,000, think about it, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 foot horizontal laterals along, first of all, it's steel pipe. So they're drilling down like this with a steel pipe and they're turning it, and then they're drilling horizontally into these formations and hitting a target the size of a refrigerator a mile away. It's phenomenal technology. But the only way you can produce it is to frack the rock, because it's such tight rock. And in the old days, these Codell wells, these vertical wells, you drove them through these formations and there wasn't enough of a pay zone to get much out of them, and it was only the tax credits that made them economic. Now you can drill all these long laterals and get all that oil and gas out by fracking all along the length. And so that's been done in other parts of the country, and where the shale plays developed, the Barnett Shale down in Texas, and the Haynesville in East Texas, the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, and I would say New York, except you can't do it in New York. And in 2009, fracking came to Colorado because the Niobrara, horizontal Niobrara play came to Colorado, and I think it was the Jake well not too far from here that kicked it off. So all of a sudden, you add to all this population pressure and everything else, the fact that we've got this whole new industry, if you will, of drilling horizontal wells in this area, a prolific oil and gas field that's been around since, what, 50s and 60s, the DJ Basin. But now you could drill in and near communities, first of all, communities comprised of people who maybe aren't even familiar with oil and gas. You could drill under them, and you were doing it with this scary technique called fracking. You were dumping all these chemicals underground under high pressure, and who knows where those chemicals were going. It's a scary thought. And you know, it's compounded by a lot of the controversy was stoked and created by the fact that a company that shall remain nameless, but it was called Chesapeake, was released a lot of property in New York State in and around the New York City water supply, and they were planning on drilling horizontal wells and fracking, and people went crazy. What's this going to do to the New York City water supply? And so, you know, it's New York, it's the center of the media. I mean, that really focused a lot of public attention. But people are concerned. And the industry was very slow to react. Industry saw this as a fake controversy. It's fracking. We've been fracking wells for 60 years. What are you talking about? Nothing's going to happen. And so industry was very, in their typical way, defensive, dismissive, arrogant, unresponsive, deciding that this was not a real problem, so we don't have to deal with it. And all of you who are saying it's a real problem, you just need to, if you just would know the truth, if you knew the facts, like we know the facts, you would know this is not a real problem, so get over it. That was a bad strategy. And by the time industry finally realized that, it was too late. And a lot of this momentum had been created, a lot of hysteria, a lot of concern. Some of it well-founded, because fracking, industry thinks of fracking as you go down, as Craig described, along the length of this horizontal wellbore, way below the surface, way below any fresh water that's way up here, separated by thousands of feet of impermeable rock. You crack the rock for a few hundred feet on each side of the wellbore. And you're doing it by definition into a hydrocarbon-bearing zone, which is already toxic. I mean, it's got benzene and all this other stuff. It's got hydrocarbons. So how could that possibly impact groundwater way up here? That's industry's thinking. But fracking is the whole process of bringing water to the site, all the noise and the commotion, conducting the operation, bringing the water back to the surface, handling the fluids, disposing of them, and then you got produced water coming up from the formation. What do we do with that? People, it all tends to blur in people's minds, and that's what they think of as fracking. It's the whole process. And fracking makes possible our reliance on fossil fuels, which is, yeah, it's a great boon, a great benefit to society. It could make us energy independent, but it's also delaying the transition to a carbon-free society. So people have concerns. So when you talk about fracking, it's all of those things are wrapped up. I'm getting way ahead of myself.
Well, you were going in so many interesting directions, and I don't know. We have only a few more minutes, and I've just been thinking that we're.
So let me talk about local regulation.
What I thought, well, that's what great minds think alike here. I was going to suggest that we take our last 4 or 5 minutes with you, because I have excellent questions here, and I want to make sure we get to those. But we ask you to talk about the history and status of the moratoria and bans, and because you're in such a position from what you just said as to where it might come, and what local regulation might be in response to that. But really, I want you to say something about the governor's task force and the chances of that producing something that would address local regulation in a problem-solving way. So, and if you run out of time before you get to that, or if you want to talk about that, I would like, that was not on your list of questions.
It's okay.
I'm violating the contract
I
with
can
the
do it.
lawyer.
Let me just say, there's a lot to talk about. You know, the basic law in Colorado was made in 1992, 2 Supreme Court decisions. The Greeley case, Greeley actually banned drilling in the late 80s by ballot initiative, and an operator sued, and the Colorado Supreme Court said, you can't do that, Greeley. You cannot absolutely prohibit drilling. The Oil and Gas Act in Colorado preempts you from doing that. So we know on the one hand that you can't just prohibit, a local community cannot just prohibit oil and gas, which is why recently you saw the fracking ban struck down from Longmont, and this extended moratorium that Fort Collins imposed also was struck down. Courts just looked at that case and said, this is clear, and pretty much every lawyer that I had talked to, everybody in the industry thought that would be the result. Nobody really, from the legal side, thought that the Longmont fracking ban had any chance of surviving. But the other case that came down that day was from La Plata County. There was a coal bed methane boom, the technology developed in the 80s down in La Plata County. That led to a lot of conflict and concern, intensive development, gas seeps, all kinds of things that were going on. And so the county said, we're going to try to regulate this. And an operator said, you can't regulate us. Only the state can do that. You're in county, you can't regulate oil and gas. Went to the Supreme Court, same day as the Greeley decision. Colorado Supreme Court said, yes, there is room for local regulation here. It's not just a complete preemption by the state. The local government can regulate aspects of oil and gas development, certainly has land use authority, and that doesn't give them the right to regulate the technical and operational aspects of oil and gas, but land use is a pretty broad rubric, and if you add to that a home rule city that has police power to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, it's pretty broad authority in a local government. So the question, according to the Supreme Court, is there an operational conflict with what the local community is doing to what the state interest is? Would the local government be materially impeding or interfering with the state interest? If not, if not, the local government can do what it's doing. And you have to have a hearing, an evidentiary hearing, in order to make that determination. So it's case by case. So they said the La Plata County regulation, we have to send it back to the trial court for a hearing. The case got settled, but it established the precedent that a local government can regulate. So now the question is, how far can they go? What can they regulate? And there have been some cases over the years to determine that. And one of the cases that was brought by industry in the state was against Longmont, because the other thing they did besides banning fracking was to enact a comprehensive oil and gas regulation that governed all aspects of oil and gas regulation, or at least a lot of them, with their own permitting process and their own review of what the operators were planning on doing, and even to the point of being able to require them to drill horizontal wells when the city thought it was appropriate. So industry sued and said, you can't do that. Only the state can do that. As a part of all of this global settlement with the task force, industry and the state dismissed that lawsuit. So that ordinance is still in effect in Longmont. It could still be challenged by an operator, but it hasn't been to this point. What happened with the, so you had these ballot initiatives by communities that were scared of oil and gas development that were coming to them, or they were perceived to be coming to them. And so they banned fracking, or they imposed moratoria, and the law, I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but with a moratorium, you can temporarily defer consideration of granting permits, but if you just do it indefinitely for an extended period, it begins to look like a real ban, and that's what happened with Fort Collins. There are people obviously frustrated by what they see as the state's inability to rein in oil and gas development. And so there were ballot initiatives, I'm sure you're all familiar with them, to impose setbacks, mandatory setbacks on oil and gas development, which industry saw as anathema because it would take a lot of acreage out of play. The governor negotiated a compromise between the proponents of those ballot initiatives and industry and major stakeholders to form a task force to take a look at what do we need to do around local regulation to address people's concerns. That was after he had failed. He had tried to convene a group to draft legislation and was never able to get to the point of agreement in that group. Governor owes me $100 actually from that effort. He bet me he could do it. I thought it was just asking too much in too short a period of time and too complex a subject to try to do that. So now it's the panel with all these different stakeholders. It's going to try to come to some kind of a consensus on where do we go with this? Do we even have a problem that we need to address? Obviously, a lot of people think we do. What I haven't had time yet to talk about, and I can just briefly mention it, is we've had, over the last 15 years, a series of laws and rulemakings that have made the state regulatory system the most stringent and robust in the country. There really is no other state that has a regulatory system for oil and gas development like Colorado. And industry is, of course, tired of it and thinks that they've had to endure much more than any mortal should have to endure in developing oil and gas. It's been grueling and difficult, but Colorado really has led the way in changing what used to be sort of an administrative process into a zoning type process where you now have to file permits that are extensive with all kinds of information. You have to consult with state agencies on these permits. Local governments, local communities can appoint, this is very important, can appoint a local government designee, which is a local official, somebody in your town, who's your representative to the Oil and Gas Commission, who gets notice of all the permit applications within your community and can comment to the director of the Oil and Gas Commission on that permit application and can communicate about local concerns that ought to be taken into account. There's lots of other ways the process now has been changed. Point here is simply there's been a lot of regulation, a lot of regulatory change. The question is what else needs to be done, if anything? Can this panel come to a resolution, a compromise? I think it's going to be doubtful, but I don't want to sound like, doom and gloom.
We're not going to bet you because we know what happened. This is a private communication that I really shouldn't make, but I actually had dreams of that task force with Howard and me being on it. And I saw some potential in that, but it turns out there's no need to fear that, I guess. So anyway, that would have been really an interesting experience. Okay, now we're going to Pete Morton, who is an economist, and we will begin, he was with, well, why would I give your bio? You're supposed to do the thing about how did you get to be up here at this table and what has brought you with us tonight?
I got here in a car. That burns oil, maybe from Greg's company. I went to CSU. I'm a grad student there in the forestry department, and now I live in Boulder. And I only root against the U1 game, that's when they play the Rams. My background's in forestry and renewable resource management. And I spent most of my career working for the Wilderness Society in the research department, a nonprofit environmental group. And I started off working on wilderness and recreation and timber and really fun things. And then in 2001, George Bush got in office and we needed to work on oil and gas. I've been working on oil and gas since 2001. When I started working on oil and gas, we were paying about $1.50 a gallon. So here we are 13 years into a drilling boom, and we're glad that gas drops to $3 a gallon. So in terms of dropping prices, it hasn't been very efficient. When I started, I worked on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, where they were looking to drill. And at that time, I reviewed 7 major forecasts for oil prices. And not a single forecast had oil above $30 a barrel through 2020. So the high prices that we have now, we've dropped down to 80. It's been driven by historically high prices. None of this stuff, that the tax credits expired, and without these spikes in natural gas prices that we had in the last decade, and without oil being close to $100 a barrel, this boom would have been much, much less. So it's high prices that have been driving this stuff. So I worked for 18 years at the Wilderness Society. On the left, now I live in Boulder. I work myself, and I work for the Conservation Economics Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank. And we're sort of free to put up our own ideas, regardless of what anyone else wants us to say. And I've been really working on taking in multiple perspectives, trying to understand where everyone's coming from. And I think the more perspectives on an issue we can take, the more consciousness on that issue rises up. So that's how I got here.
Okay, so you're a big sketch in an efficient manner. Your assignment is the elements of the economic context of oil and gas development, especially in prices as drivers of production, but also in terms of jobs and economic impacts and revenue and so on.
I actually have graphs.
Because if you have an economist, you cannot go without PowerPoint. That's just not going to happen.
I tried 8, she gave me 4 slides. So this is a historical view of the natural gas drilling that we've had in the U.S., with the blue line being all of the wells, and then the, let's see, the black line is oil wells, and the green is natural gas. So you can see when we go to war in the Middle East, we tend to drill a lot in the U.S. And the boom started off with the green line going up. This most recent one was natural gas. That was on the western slope, over in Grand Junction, Rifle, up in Pinedale, Wyoming. And that was caused by several spikes of natural gas. One of them was caused probably most likely by Enron in around 2001. It started this whole thing off. And then the natural gas, you can see the production dropped, drilling dropped, and 2007, 2008 when we had the big collapse. And natural gas prices, because it's a domestic market, have not recovered. But oil prices shot back up. So the black line on the bottom is oil rigs, wells being drilled. So you can see we shifted from natural gas to more oil drilling, which brought more of the drilling rigs to the front range. Right now, around 80% of the rigs in the U.S. are drilling for oil, only about 20% for natural gas. And so this gives it a historic, and I have some numbers at the bottom to talk about. We've drilled a lot of wells in this country, and more than any other country in the world. And we've moved through a lot of our conventional resources, and we're now moving to more some of our unconventional resources, which tend to require higher prices and can tend to have more externalities, hidden cost, which are supposed to be, one of the great assumptions in economics is all of the environmental costs are included in the supply curve, and that never happens. So I work a lot on the environmental side of these costs. So this is a drilling boom. So this is my take on externalities. This is this is how I categorized some of the hidden costs that spill over onto communities. And I've been trying to, as Teresa said, there's very little research on this stuff. Some of the studies, we did the first analysis of habitat fragmentation of wildlife ever completed on oil and gas well. And there's only one, there's a second study just came out, there's only one peer-reviewed study on the impact on property values. Showing about a 4 to 8% decline in property values 2.5 miles from a well or other facilities. So we're starting to get this information. There's a study going on at DU, another one at CSU. The scientists at CU are involved at CSU, so we're starting to get some good information coming out. But a lot of these costs, you don't know if they're real or not. People think they're real. Well, if you displace wildlife, that's a pretty real cost. We're showing an increase in volatile organic chemicals coming from these things. The methane rates are much higher than were assumed in the past. Several studies out of CU. So we're trying to internalize through what the research that we're doing is understanding and internalize some of these costs into the supply curve so that we really understand what this stuff is costing, and trying to understand that there's some impacts that the industry might have had ignored in the past because no one was around. But now we have fast communities. Like when I was in school, Timnath had 200 people. You guys are up like 1,200. You know, that's different. That's a different place. And that's how it is along the Front Range. I mean, we are a very mature natural amenity state. People move here because it's a beautiful state. I've been here 25 years. I'm not going anywhere. It's a beautiful state to live in. And it's the key to our economic success for me. For me, it's environmental protection is the key to economic success in this state. And so if we don't protect the environment, our economy is not going to do as well. And so for me, trying to have oil and gas while protecting the environment is key. And the two variables we tend to look at is the pace and scale at which development occurs. So we're trying to slow the thing down so that we reduce some of the environmental impacts and not impact property value so much, not impact recreation and tourism industry so much, keep our air a little cleaner. So that's where I'm coming from. A lot of the research we're doing is basically applying forest principles, good forest management principles, and good principles in terms of renewable resources, and applying them to a non-renewable resource.
You'll want to move on to issues of revenue and benefits, economic benefits to a state as well as the...
Yes, and I mean, it's a nice problem to have be rich in natural resources and in natural amenities. I mean, some don't have either. But it does bring jobs to the state, but we have other industries that are really important and have been driving this. You know, we have educated people in the state of Colorado, and they come here because it's a nice place, and they have jobs too. And so how do you mix these two? How do you keep the high-tech workers and the university scientists who have to drive cars to work? You know, how do you do all that? And our concern is that there is some cost to community. So I live in Boulder, and I voted for a moratorium, and I have written extensive comments in support of the moratorium, because for me, it's about protecting Boulder's economy and wanting better baseline data on impacts. Because if something does happen and you don't have baseline data, then you're not going to win in court. So for me as a scientist, having better health baseline data on health impacts on the population is a prerequisite before you start going too fast down this line. And there was a study in Boulder County looking at how much cost was per well just on the roads. And they came up with like $35,000 to $45,000 per well in terms of additional road costs. So that's just breaking even on your road costs. So a lot of the revenue that might be coming in doesn't necessarily filter down to communities. So you have a very truck-intensive industry that comes in and can have pretty big impact on your road system. And somewhere down the line, you're hoping for revenue that might cover that, but the distribution of revenue doesn't always flow to some of the impacted communities as much as needed in the early stages. So you have a timing problem where you have cost early on in terms of, let's say, infrastructure costs, and then the flow of production revenue comes later. So you have sort of a lag, which causes additional sort of potential fiscal problems for communities, especially communities that aren't historically doing oil and gas. And that, you know, Boulder, even though it has a history, and people don't know we have several hundred wells in the county already before they moved there, but it's changed. And it's a, you know, it's a very smart place, and it's a very challenging place to work sometimes. But it's important to recognize that oil and gas does not drive the economy of Colorado. It drives the economy of some counties and some communities, but statewide, I look at it as adding, you know, an additive to the engine that really kicks up the RPM, but it's not the engine. And I think there's been some misunderstanding in how important the economy is to the state. It doesn't mean that oil and gas isn't important to run our economy. Don't get me wrong, we all use it. But it's important to understand there's other industries, outdoor recreation, tourism, high-tech, university research, which are really important for our economy, and diversifying our economy, which is really important for a community health perspective, is to keep the economy as diverse as possible.
I guess we have sent an agent of Center of the American West out into the world to have a child who just graduated from high school. This is a big research project we were doing, and he graduated in this area, Front Range area. And our research project is bringing results because our co-worker's son is reporting a number of his pals getting out of high school getting remarkable wages, which would be so unlikely, and having read studies and newspapers about the decline of blue-collar jobs for the not college graduate kind of person. I worry that there's something a little bit bloodless in your presentation here, because you're not noting that some people are getting some remarkable rates of compensation in ways that are very...
There's no questions asked. The wages are much higher in oil and gas. There's no questions asked. And the challenge is the potential of coming out of high school and taking that job and hoping it's going to be there your whole life without going back and investing in education. You know, petroleum engineers, for example. Then you're looking at a long term. But when there is high-paying jobs. And my goal is simply to control the pace and scale so that you keep those jobs along longer. Because you want to worry about the boom and bust cycle. And this is very historic with oil and gas, is a boom and bust. We had the bust in Grand Junction that came with a drop of natural gas prices. And we're seeing now a drop in oil prices. So it's about trying to mitigate some of these historic problems that industry has had with boom and bust. So to keep, what your goal would be is to keep that high-paying job as long as possible, and going in and doing as much as quickly as possible and as fast as possible may, you know, as I told someone out in Grand Junction years ago, it's like he wanted a place for his grandchildren to drill. I said, well, slow down, we'll leave some places for them. So I think there's a lot of benefits from being thoughtful. In forestry, for example, we always talked about controlling the pace and scale of logging. We didn't go in, well, sometimes we did, but for the most part, we didn't go in and clear cut the whole watershed. You would go in and you would control the pace and scale at which logging is occurring. So what we're recommending is not a ban, not anything like that, but controlling the pace and scale of which oil and gas occurs so that those high-paying jobs can stick along a lot longer. And it allows the community to absorb the impact at more of a controlled pace.
Could you tell us something about those mechanisms for control and pacing, and could you watch his reaction while we...
So this is what we're talking about. Our research is called phased energy development, and it's about regulating the pace and scale. And we believe that communities should have some control over regulating the pace and scale. Howard talked about local communities having some control to regulate, and the idea is that if you don't want it, you should be able to have some control over it, just like you have control of regulating lots of other industries, you know. And so we support the right. We have several papers out that we've written, and a couple more coming up. And the idea is the reason we look at pace and scale is they're key variables for controlling the impacts on local communities, whether that's jobs or benefits or costs, but it's also key variables for those externalities, those hidden costs. I like the air quality rule, very good rule, but for me it's necessary but not sufficient. If you don't control for the pace and scale of how many wells you have, then it's not a sufficient law. If you have the best air quality regs and you have 10 wells, or you have 10,000 wells, there's a big difference. And there's nothing in the law that's going to prevent 10,000 wells. So I talked to the air quality folks, and they said, you have implicit assumptions in your regulations of this is a good regulation because we're going to assume this pace and scale of development to keep under the air quality standards. Well, then make that hardline that into the regulation. So this is our approach, and it's basically coming from forestry and natural resource management on renewable resources and trying to get some sense of that in the oil and gas.
And you have an idea that really struck me when I first heard it, of the equivalent. Well, I guess give us the background on the third-party certification thing with timber products and how you see that possibly being picked up and moving to oil and gas.
So in forestry, they were cutting a lot of old-growth timber in the Pacific Northwest. It's spot owl controversy. And out of that flowed the Forest Stewardship Council, which was an independent third-party organization that then certified forest operations as being sustainable. And this allowed Home Depot and consumers to say, I want to, go to Home Depot, you see FSC certified wood, that's forest certified wood. And it has an independent third-party certification system that goes in and says, okay, it's produced sustainably. So the concept that Joe and I are working on is applying that in oil and gas. So that I work on the natural gas working group in Boulder, and we're looking at trying to responsibly source natural gas for the new utility. Since if you don't want drilling in Boulder, we don't want to export our environmental problems, so how can we source gas that's responsibly developed? So the idea of a third party parallels what happened in forestry, and it sounds like Craig's already doing a lot of that as a good example. But the idea is that as I'm a consumer, I know that this gas has good baseline data. I know they have infrared cameras out there. I know they're doing the inspections. I know they're doing some of these other things. Whereas in the current regulatory environment, you don't know if the regulations are actually enforced. You have limited number of inspectors. You have some baseline data that's missing. So for me, it gives a guarantee of more responsible oil and gas development than Boulder proper can then feel good about buying and elevating the market. So just like we did in forestry, you're trying, or another parallel example is the LEED system in building, where you get different bronze, silver, gold standards to be buildability efficient. So we're trying to elevate the debate, recognizing we all use oil and gas, and can we clean this up? Can we, and it's just simply consumers expressing their preference in the marketplace of, well, yes, we have to use this, can we get it a little cleaner? And so that's one of the ideas that we had about going on.
Your comments on Boulder make me wonder. So, in another project on water, I coined the really wonderful and memorable phrase that no one adopts, which is that the last 100 years has been the era of improbable comfort made possible by a truly astonishing but taken for granted infrastructure. And that has not become a household name. And really, the fourth time you say it, you got it. It's really the first 3 times you struggle. But that, but the disconnect between production and consumption over the last century, that we turn on the light switch, we turn the faucet, and the resources come, and we don't have to think about the production. As I understand it, the Boulder municipalization of energy is a local utility has a lot of natural gas in the formula for that. So it will not be produced in proximity to Boulder, but Boulder will be given the chance to continue the era of improbable comfort made possible by truly astonishing but taken for granted infrastructure.
So out of that discussion, the issue of hypocrisy came up. And so I graphed NIMBY hypocrisy. NIMBY is not in my backyard. So I was at a meeting in the Natural Gas Working Group, and I finally just walked up to the chalkboard and put up my NIMBY hypocrisy curve that represented Boulder. We want to use natural gas, we just don't want to produce it. But out of that came this idea of, well, we want to clean it up, so we had a third-party certification of a way of moving down the curve of hypocrisy. And the other idea would be to reduce our consumption. So I push sort of a consumption ethic. This flows out of years and years of conversation with Randy Udall about an energy consumption ethic. We take this all for granted. We have this beautiful community in Boulder that's been built a lot on mining and oil and gas wealth, and we use a lot of it in town, and we don't want it anywhere near. And so the only way I can address my own hypocrisy is to try to push for third-party certification and then a consumption ethic, which can then reduce our demand. And so what that pushed out of the Natural Gas Working Group is a shift in the discussions on the municipal utility to how can we reduce our consumption of natural gas. So now that's pushed the dialogue into more demand-side management and more renewable energy, recognizing that hypocrisy.
Okay, we are going to be shifting to questions from the audience now, but I would like to have an occasion of thanking the panelists for their opening parts, because you were all really quite remarkable. So, boy, oh boy, have I got questions, boy, oh boy. So, we are going to start, I think, with water, because that's a small size here. And anyone, I think a lot of these will be for you, but in fact, this one is, I think, pretty obviously for you, but let's not start with that one. Okay, let's start here. Oh, Emily, thank you so much. On average, a frac well uses 5 million gallons of water. The industry claims this is insignificant, yet this is equivalent to the domestic needs of a city of 1,500 people. If the industry drills 3,000 wells annually, isn't this significant? Especially since the water is destroyed or put out of the hydrologic cycle.
That is correct in the fact that a horizontal well does use, and I believe it's actually more than 5,000 or 5 million gallons. I'd have to get my calculator up. We talk in barrels. Our oil is produced in barrels, and we go after it with barrels of water. So I'm going to talk, I guess, in real time for that. All I know is when I Googled water in the Front Range, and actually it was a gentleman at Halliburton that advised me to do this. And after you get through a lot of rigmarole, what I found was in 2012, 85% of all water in the Front Range was used for agriculture use, 13% was used for municipalities, and less than 1% was used for oil and gas. Now the boom, how we were completing wells in 2012 has really transitioned, so it'd be interesting to see the 13 and fast forward to 14 and have that crystal ball. I think we're probably 3 to 4 to even 5 times that, so we're probably at moving to 5% would be my guess for an industry. And this is, again, just from my educated guesses. We had a 6-well pad in the Eaton area where it was during the wintertime. It was after the floods of September, last year ago September. And it is a tree farm, so it has industrial use water from his water wells. So we went to the farmer because we want to try to get trucks off the road as an industry. We work hard at that. And I said, can I buy your water at the municipal rate that we would have to truck it from town of Eaton 3 miles over here to your farm? And I told him how much water we needed for those 6 wells. And he sat there, and again, he worked in gallons, so I worked in barrels, and we quantified it at obviously 42 gallons to a barrel. And he says, well, yeah, that won't be a problem. The water table's really high anyway, and really everybody's struggling after the floods because we're so saturated. So we got it papered up and had all the legalese behind it. And he said that really that's 5 weeks of what I water my 240 acres with in the summertime. And wow. That quantified to me thinking, okay, he gets his water use from April through September, and that's 5 weeks of it, so maybe it's 1/10 of his water for the summer. And it didn't move his water table at all. His wells pumped just fine. It just quantified to me the amount that obviously ag uses. And you know, that being said, you know, obviously it's one of the ways that we have to go ahead and fracture these wells. It is a necessary evil. The industry is looking at you know, reusing your water, and more so than any other industry, we are doing a lot of water recycling on locations. The bigger operators are doing a better job of it than we are, simply because they have blocks of contiguous acreage. If you drive down I-25 and you see all those rigs as you're getting into Frederick and Firestone, Anadarko has all that Union Pacific leasehold there. But they can have a rig here and a completion going here, and they're just trading water back and forth. And it's cutting down on trucking, but it's also, you bring the flow back up, they're cleaning it for reuse. So the industry's doing a good job, but obviously we are using a mass of water like we've never seen. But I do think when you look at the overall consumption, and again, that's the debate, is what are the benefits of what we're producing here in our home state, that we're using right here in our home state, versus what we're having to do to, you know, the expense and the resource that we're having to utilize to go chase that oil and natural gas. We didn't touch on it earlier, we see a lot of gas and oil on the graphs. The wells in Weld County bring up both. There's the hydrocarbons of the natural gas, and the pressures of that is what our transporter is that lifts the oil condensate. The oil is some of the sweetest crude in the country. When you look at it, it looks like a cross between orange juice and Mountain Dew. It is a orange-green tint. It's almost clear. It looks like the gasoline that you're putting in your cars, and it smells like the gasoline. If you were to stand on a tank as they're hauling the oil away, it smells as though you're standing at the pump filling your car up. That's the same waft that you get.
Okay.
Can I just address that for a second?
Yes.
Just real briefly, the 2 issues for me is the percent is one thing, but it's removing it from the hydrological cycle. If you remove 1% every year, you're going to have a problem. And then the potential to displace farmers who might use that. So that it's...
I mean, on the other side of that, I've been amazed, and I just got the email again. We've leased a lot of CBT water rights from farmers all over Weld County, and they're enjoying dryland farming and catching a lot of revenue from us. I mean, there is a give and take, and we field calls all the time. Do you need any more water? I've got water. I'd like to go ahead and lease you at today's rate. When we first locked in our water contracts, we were getting them for about $3 to $4 per 1,000 gallons, and today it would be $12 to $14 per 1,000 gallons. So the water has become gold, and those that have water rights are benefiting greatly if they're utilizing them through oil and gas.
You know, on the west, just to lend a little western slope perspective to the issue of water, on the western slope, we say that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And historically, it's been huge fights. And I think the concern on the western slope is, although there is some concern about removing water from the hydrologic cycle and the amount that's being used in fracking operations, the bigger concern really is trans-mountain diversions for municipal use. So, you know, that's a bigger issue for the western side of the state, is how much water do Front Range communities need or want for strictly for municipal use, and are they going to take it from the western side?
It's hard.
Can I jump in? Or?
Oh, my questions. What to do here? We're going to stay overnight, as it turns out. The brownies are a delight, so that will be really. Oh no, goodness. Okay.
I can hold it.
No, we are speaking of water, so, okay, yeah, so we're going to go, we have a little custom, we'll just do this quickly, where I feel that because I'm reading the questions, I should speak with the intensity of the question writer from time to time, and it may or may not be conveying my temperament. Okay, ready? Great.
Yep.
Will you let your dog drink the groundwater on your site?
My dog goes to location with me all the time. I'm not in the field as much as I was when we started our company, but Oreo's out there with me all the time.
Oreo? Is he black and white?
Black and white.
Oh, for goodness sake.
The 8-year-old named him. But yeah, again, I'm in the industry and I lived nearby it. The only reason I moved was I wanted to go to a smaller community with the schools that Windsor had versus the schools my kids were experiencing in Greeley. So don't play this back in Greeley. So crucified me for that. Long story short is I have total faith in what we do personally as an operator. I have faith in our peer groups as operators because of what was mentioned earlier, and the fact that we are regulated and we are monitored to such a high level that you know, I feel personally total confidence in everything that we do and the safety of emissions, water, all the above.
Okay, we're going back to these injection wells in a kind of package thing here. One is what could we do with water reuse and treatment that would make, what would it take to make injection wells unnecessary? And then concerns, I spoke with COGCC, apparently there may be no safety regs for seismic testing. Are there any? And are the same precautions taken with injection wells as with fracking wells? How can you know what the outcome will be of injecting this toxic water in 50 to 100 years from now?
Let me tackle. There was many.
Yes, there were. Okay, so reuse and treatment.
Reuse is more and more prevalent. We do own an injection well out between Gill and Briggsdale, County Road 392 and County Road 69, I think. It was part of an acquisition of another oil and gas company we did about 15 months ago. And the injection well came along with it. We thought we would just divest it. It ended up being a necessary for us, and the fact that, especially in the midsummer when the seismic activity of the minor earthquake in Greeley, I truly do believe, and I probably have people in the industry quaff at me for going ahead and making this statement, but that injection well that's out by the Greeley Airport probably had a hand in that. That injection well was deeper, and the operator of that injection well deeper than, there were two injection wells in the Front Range of Colorado that were to a deeper formation, and they were putting a lot of pressure and putting away probably 5 to 10 times more water and disposable produced water a day than they needed to be. The state figured that out, did their studies, made them cement back up to what's called the Lyons Formation, and that's a formation that's very porous and it will drink, and they can no longer put that water down there under pressure. There are numerous other injection wells that are just coming online and or being drilled. I think the issues that when you read about injection wells in Oklahoma, those are a different formation. It's a whole different rock over there than where we're injecting. Injection wells are necessary, evil for the industry right now, but I think as you proceed, one of the things we've done is, in fact, I've got another meeting next week with the Oil and Gas Commission, is we have a third party who has patented a mobile on-site cleaning through carbons of the produced water and or flowback water from your fractures of the wells, that we can go ahead and about 20% of what they bring in will have to be disposed of injection wells. The rest of it we can go ahead and clean, recycle to a level that we can go ahead and, if you will, sell it out the back door to other operators that want to come to our location and pick it up. We see that as a necessary because of the mass of water that these wells create and flow back, and it's just the right thing to do for industry. It's just like the FLIR cameras. I'm not going to get off on a tangent that we talked about earlier. To us, it's part of the cost of doing business responsibly. And again, we feel like we're somewhat a leader in that as a small operator that has the local presence, but at the same time, all of our peers, there are very few fly-by-nights, as we talked about the issues in the 90s and people that don't do things. You can't. The Oil and Gas Commission, the CDPHE, all the regulators, you won't be in business long. You can't afford the fines that would come your way. So people are responsive to the regulations. We don't have to necessarily agree with how, to the level we're regulated, but it's the game that we're in, and we have to go ahead and do it responsibly. So I really credit the Anadarkos, the Nobles, the PDCs, the Encanas. The operators are just bigger than us, that have more acres than us, for being ahead of the game, if you will, and being responsive to it. We talked of big bad oil and gas just blowing their chest up and saying, yeah, we ain't listening. The operators in Colorado hear it loud and clear, and we respect, and we want to be transparent, and we want to show you that we can do it properly.
Can I comment just briefly on the issue of toxic materials in fracking fluids? And I want to bring everybody back to the concept of dose. And Craig, you talked about the thousands of, you talking barrels or gallons, or I think it's important to understand and try and think about how much of those chemicals are in the fracking fluid in terms of percentage of the total volume of the material, and in terms of being exposed to a toxic material. Again, the idea of dose being very important, and especially as it spreads underground and dissipates in the rock. That said, it's important that we as the public pay attention to what's happening, what's being used, and try and understand that. And I think one of the changes that's come into play in terms of the technology of hydraulic fracturing is because of public concern, largely, I think. We've created an environment where it's much less likely, and now under regulation, impossible for the companies to just say, oh, don't worry about it, it's a secret or a trade secret, and so therefore we don't have to tell you anything that's happening. The website Frack Focus was actually created first in Colorado. It's now nationwide, so that you can actually go in on the website and look at a specific well, the well that's in your backyard, and find out what's been used and how that well has been treated. Now, there are some still, I'll admit, some loopholes for giving exact amounts of materials. That's still that trade secret part. But for the most part, the public has driven the right to know, and I think it's our job to keep aware of what's going on in the industry and in our environment, and try and understand what's happening with us. Unfortunately, we create regulations not because we pull them out of the sky and think that they're just great things to do, but because something has happened somewhere along the line and we're responding to it. And that's, most of the players, I agree, are good folks, but there have been bad actors, and that's why we create those regulations.
And we do have a question on that subject, fracking's special exceptions. Why are there exceptions for fracking? And Safe Drinking Water Act and so on, with writers saying that this needs to change as soon as possible. By the way, we are starting with water because I did understand before we got here that water is a particular concern in this community. So, so I'm going to point out that the night is going on, but we have this great group of people with such, well, no, you have so much to say, so I'm going to keep going with questions, though I do understand that people might have lives and they might have to pursue that, but it seems to me we need to take advantage of these poor people, so, not take advantage in a negative sense, but really have this opportunity. So, we do have just a couple more water, back to the injection wells, we had the two questions that were in some version of, are there regulations, safety regulations for seismic testing on injection wells, and are the same precautions taken, and what might we expect 50 or 100 years from now if we have put toxic chemicals into the earth?
Well, I think we touched on it numerous times as regulations, they've all evolved because of situation and or concern. And yes, this, I know a gentleman in Fort Collins who personally, through a group of investors, is drilling injection wells as we speak. One just came on near the Greeley Airport, and the other one's coming on down in Peckham, which is between Gilchrist and Platteville on Highway 85. And then he has plans on drilling more, one up in the north of Windsor, east of Severance area, and one out towards Briggsdale. Long story short is yes, the regulations for an injection well have become, his term I think was a gauntlet, how tough it is to go through. Seismic is things that are parts of that, and the studies and the automation and the ability to go ahead and track and monitor your well to a higher level than the wells that were just drilled and started in production 5 and 10 years ago. It's to a much higher level. So yes, I mean they are regulated just as strongly as the produced wells are.
Can I clarify that question, because you've asked it twice? It's about section 333 of the COGCC rules, and it has to do with thumper trucks, not slot hole, you know, and I have not found any. The COGCC told me they could not find regulation of thumper trucks. And my specific question was about gas lines that might be occurring under thumper trucks accidentally.
Right.
That's what the question was.
Understood, okay. I think we've only participated in one seismic shoot. The bigger operators and or just third parties are the ones motivating the seismic because they know that us as operators want it. So it's the race to go ahead and get the seismic, and then they can present it to us and sell it to us at a price, and that's how they make their money. It's people making money on the industry, if you will. I do know the one that we participated in was on west of I-25 between the Johnstown exit down through Meade, just because we have a nice block of acreage in there as an operator. I do know that they do all the locates, and they do strategically place where those thumpers are going versus whether it's a commercial or a gathering system gas line. More of the issues I've ever heard of are, the old tile lines of irrigation lines and or the PVC pipes that these heavy trucks, when they drive over them, the ground's soft, they go ahead and hurt the irrigation process, if you will, and dealing with those on a case-by-case basis. I have not heard of, and we actually have acreage right in the heart of Greeley. Obviously, we do a lot of operations in Greeley. And a private operator who no longer exists, they were just bought out, did a full shoot of the city of Greeley. It was the largest municipal shoot in the country for square miles. And I did not hear of one incident. I heard of a lady whose small cottage house close to the road, the thumper knocked a picture frame off her mantle because the house shook. But as far as foundations and or gas lines or anything, I've never heard, in my knowledge, and this is over, seismic has been prevalent here in this basin for 3 to 5 years. It became a boom. And I don't know if your area, understand Timnath is really on the northwest fringe of the basin. And one of the reasons you didn't have vertical wells here is you have what's called low GOR. You have more oil down there, but you don't have the gas to lift it. And just the hydrostatics of that, when you complete that well with one single zone, it's not economical with a vertical wellbore. But horizontally, when you're going out there and you do multiple fracks in a low GOR area, we drilled wells in Eaton that's considered low GOR area, and those are our best wells because we're making all the oil. Because there's enough pressure through that multiple stages to lift that oil for you. So there's a reason your community's going to have more of a target on its back going forward, is there's good minerals here, and it wasn't necessarily commercial vertically, but it will be commercial horizontally. So our company does have some leasehold here. I can't tell you exactly where it is. I'm not on the land side, but more than likely, I think the operators you're going to end up dealing with here is probably Anadarko, and then a group called Extraction who's gotten very aggressive in this basin. And they're a good young group of people, very aggressive, but they are very upfront and doing things properly. If they were drilling near me, I wouldn't have an issue, but that's because I know them and I trust how they operate.
Hopefully they will in Berthoud on October 30th.
I'm sorry, I'm just so preoccupied with all of my questions, and we will hang around a little bit afterwards for one-on-one conversations. So just one more water question, and then will be Teresa's time up here, because I think public health is a equally compelling concern here. So should there be actual monitoring well networks rather than just sampling, as is now done per COGCC rules, i.e. how about statewide quarterly water monitoring reports? And actually that could bridge into your territory. If you want. So, and Howard, I got you.
I might just point out that CSU, I think the Center for the New Energy Economy is pioneering something like that. I don't know the specifics, but they announced it at this seminar last month on natural gas development. They are developing a technology which can deliver real-time monitoring data online from test wells drilled in various areas to address that issue, to give useful, immediate public data on potential water impacts.
Have you heard in your time of any correlation between oil and gas development and contamination of water wells?
Oh, that's a really broad question. Contamination of water wells can occur in a lot of different ways, is the issue, I think. And it's easy and neat to say that fracking can contaminate water wells, but it's a way oversimplification of the issue. And you know, the flaming faucet is the classic from a gas land, which was investigated and found not to have been caused by any of the oil and gas development around that area. But that's not to say that there can't be contamination of water wells or groundwater from spills, from breaches in wellbore integrity. You talked about the wells that were drilled in the 80s. You drill horizontal wells near some of these old wellbores that were improperly, even the ones that were plugged, that they become conduits. And so that's scary stuff. And so there could well be contamination of water wells from oil and gas activity, from oil and gas development, just not necessarily from the fracking process itself. The irony of all this is that fracking sort of detracts from the real issue in my mind. The real issue is all the impacts that come from oil and gas development in proximity to communities. And the fracking process itself, I think, is a bit of a red herring, because it's not the fracking, in my view, in my layman's view of it, it's not really the fracking process itself that causes these problems, but it's the drilling activity both below the surface with wellbore integrity and all the issues above the surface that can impact communities. And so if you want to call that fracking, you can call it fracking, but to me it's oil and gas development itself. And so the issue becomes, the reason we're all here tonight is, you know, how do local communities deal with that? And I've got some thoughts on that which we can get into if you, since I ran out of time on my presentation. But I do want to talk about water for a minute. You know, it illustrates the two sides of the oil and gas industry. On the one hand, it's an industry that tends to sort of do things because they do them. And that's the way they've always done them. And they've got property rights, and they've got capital investment that they need to protect, and they need to drill wells when they can drill them, when they can get a rig, and they don't want to be detract it. They have to be able to make dependable capital investment decisions. And so there's a reason why at times that they are really quite resistant to the notion that you or anyone else ought to be slowing them down or telling them what they can't do. Because they know they've been doing it this way forever. It's whoever got hurt. Well, lots of accidents occur in the oil field. There are thousands of cases in the oil field of saltwater contamination of neighbors' property, and things happen. It's not a risk-free business. But on the other hand, the amazing thing about the industry is the technology, and you think about horizontal drilling, which has now become ubiquitous and feasible, and what it's done to minimize surface impacts. Instead of having to drill all these vertical wells like that, you can just locate them all over here on a multi-well pad. You can have 16 or 20 or 25 wells on a pad and drill them all out horizontally and minimize your impact on the surface. I will predict that in, 10 years or so, they'll be fracking without water, maybe sooner, because of a lot of the pressures that we're talking about. And so when you talk about controlling the pace and the scale of oil and gas development, that's a mixed bag, because the more you do this stuff and the more you understand what the issues are and the challenges are, the more the technology evolves to deal with these problems. Water recycling and reuse, the technology exists now to recycle and treat all this water. You can create water as pure as you want it. It comes out of well bores. It's a matter of cost. And
whose cost should that be?
Well, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
And where I would differ with Pete is not so much in the notion that the industry needs to be sustainable, needs to justify itself, but the question is who should be making that decision and on what basis? Should that be an issue that we debate at a statewide level?
Well, we could, yes.
We could, absolutely. This panel could be debating it. The legislature could be debating it. Or is it something that Timnath ought to be debating and imposing its own, or Boulder, and imposing its own ideas of what's sustainable and of how much development there should be, or how long we should wait and postpone development while it's studied by somebody who. So these are very real, substantial policy issues. The question is, how do you engage on them? Water reuse and recycling and treatment is a huge issue, and it's going to be the issue, I think, for the industry over the next several years. But industry will resolve it.
Okay, I'm going to point out that I have been instructed that we are actually closing around 9. And dear heaven, I just feel like my sacred obligation is to these people who wrote the damn question, not the damn question. And so we're going into really lightning fill in the blank kind of. Okay, so.
Yes, on a network of monitoring wells, good science. The stuff on the CSU is great. Let's do it statewide.
Yeah.
One of the reasons you want to slow down is to have regulations that push the technology and gets better science. And so we get more non-toxic fracking fluid and more. So slowing down and having regulations that push technology have great benefits.
Right, and everyone should Google the name Ken Carlson, who's the guy at CSU. I just read it today that I said my big sisters have been cheerleaders, and I have become his cheerleader because he's the one doing the real-time monitoring, and it's very interesting science and engineering. So Carlson, C-A-R-L-S-O-N.
I have one 10-second anecdote. I had lunch with a gentleman by the name of Dave Stewart. Dave Stewart is a big water resource entrepreneur in Wyoming. He is on the EPA board for fracking. And I asked Dave, I said, hey, I get in front of municipalities all the time working for our use by special review, and I'm getting blasted by the community people wanting me to know more and talk more about fracking. He says, Craig, let me just simplify it for you. The EPA, he was amazed. He'd only been on it for 3 sessions, 3 meetings, and they go quarterly, I believe. But long story short, he says they don't worry. They didn't have one comment. Nothing is talked about what you're doing down at 7,000 feet. It's all about how you're containing it on surface. If there's a spill on surface, are things matted? How do you protect the groundwater? And it's evolved to the silicate sand. And now there's these Sierra systems where you contain all the sand on location. It's all sucked and vacuumed, and it's all self-contained, where just 3 years ago, they'd be dumping the sand over the top, and there'd be a waft of silicate leaving the location, and silicate is asbestos of today, if you will. So the industry has made great strides there. I was just amazed to hear Dave from the EPA make that statement back to me as far as where their stance was.
Okay, so here we go, and we're just aiming for Okay, these will be a little bit complicated, but here you go, Teresa. We're now going with, so it sounds like let's go here too. Please react to the recent recommendations from Harvard School of Public Health that there should be a moratorium on fracking because of public health issues and information.
Oh, I'm not laughing because I think it's a bad question. It's a tough one. I think we've talked a lot about the pros and cons of moratoria. And so it's not strictly an issue around do we have enough information about public health. As I said earlier, I think generally my feeling would be we need to act with a excess of caution, and we need to deal with the science that we have. I do think, and I agree with some of the things that Howard said about issues around moratoria and local communities acting independently. And I can put on my local community governance hat, my city council hat. The city of Grand Junction enacted a watershed ordinance to deal with not just oil and gas issues in our watershed, but that's really what prompted the discussion as much as anything. Any impacts to our watershed, knowing full well that that may not stand up in court. And we are a home rule community, so we had some of the other protections and legal rights that other municipalities don't have. But I also understand how complicated that becomes for not only industry, but other communities in our region, when communities act fully independently and create their own laws and regulations, and you don't know from one boundary to the next what those laws and regulations are and how you operate. And our communities, especially in the Front Range, are very close together. And so if you have completely different rules, and this goes beyond oil and gas, from one city boundary to the next, it makes life very difficult. It's like in the why the EU was created in Europe, because it's hard to have systems that work well with boundaries with different laws. So I'm a little concerned about the Harvard School of Public Health making a pronouncement on that without really being directly involved I know they're looking at what's happening on the East Coast, whether that's directly relevant all the time to what's happening on the West Coast. They don't have split estate, for example, on the East Coast, which makes life really different for people out there. I think there are concerns about the local regulation piece. Yes, within reason.
What's your advice for us lay people when we see dueling studies on fracking and public health covered in the media? How should we interpret and think about these sorts of science stories?
It's difficult. And it's not any different with oil and gas than it is with most other major health issues. You very often see conflicting data and conflicting results, and that's the nature of how science works. Because we get little bits of information at a time. Scientists are always correcting their information as they learn more, as the testing technology gets better. So yeah, we as the public are always trying to balance what we see in the media. Unfortunately, the media is not always very accurate in their reporting of scientific studies. And the media admittedly tends to want to sell papers or magazines or whatever, and the headline is the important part. And then on our part, we as the American public tend not to read past the headline or the first paragraph. And very often the important information is buried very deeply that second or third page back in the article. It's difficult because scientific information is difficult for those of us who aren't experts in the field, and I don't mean just scientists and non-scientists. I have a lot of information and expertise in immunology, but don't ask me anything about quantum physics. I couldn't interpret that if my life depended on it. So we all have our own language, and it's difficult. I think that there are no absolute answers. We have to weigh the evidence. We have to try and take the fear factor out of the information and go with the best science we have available. And to a certain extent, we have to decide as individuals who we can trust as our scientific sources and depend on them to help us make those decisions.
Could I jump on that one just for a minute? I would say, I would add a couple things. One is, you have to define your terms and make sure that semantically you know what you're talking about when you're, or you know what you're reading about. If someone's talking about the impact of fracking, what do they really mean? Are they talking, as I said before, about oil and gas development in general, or are they talking about the actual process of hydraulic fracturing, and which part of the process are they concerned about? So I think that can help you analyze when you read these things, filter out what you're reading and what they're saying. But then the other aspect of that is think about the agendas of the people who are on both sides of this. There's a substantial constituency that thinks fossil fuels are just wrong. Wrong for the planet, wrong for us, wrong for the country, and we should be getting on with the transition to a carbon-free society. If that's your point of view, fracking is inherently wrong because it promotes oil and gas development, which continues our reliance on fossil fuels. So you're going to be, if that's your filter, you're going to be, and if climate change is your issue, and carbon, methane emissions, all of that, carbon fuels contribute to climate change, in your view, fracking is evil. It just as oil and gas development is evil. And so that's an agenda. But if you're on the industry side, your agenda is to protect your capital investment, protect your ability to operate at a profit.
But climate change is a science.
Well, I'm just saying that people tend to view these issues and debate these issues through their own prism.
I'm going to ask you, are going to just, I have some questions. We only have 12 minutes, 13 minutes, so, and we'll hang out, and the one-on-one conversations can go wild at that point, that'll be fine, but I'm just going to hold it on there. But I worry a little bit about that, because really, if you can just say, this study came from this angle, then when do you ever find a study that you can say, oh, I can pay attention to that? So I do worry a little bit about that. And speaking of studies, Dr. Lisa McKenzie at the Colorado School of Public Health, her study showed high rates of birth defects should the task force or any decision-making group address those risks. So could you talk about the McKenzie study?
Yeah, the McKenzie study is interesting. And I have read the study, and I'm familiar with the group that did the work. She brings out some good things that need looking at. I also find it interesting, though, that the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment came out shortly after that study was published and criticized the study from the standpoint of her choice of a population to study, and the fact that not everyone, and I'm doing this from memory, so don't hold me to it, but apparently, according to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, some of the people, the birth outcomes that she studied, the mothers actually did not live near oil and gas operations. And so there was a mixture of populations that probably didn't have the same experience and the same exposure. Now, I don't know that for a fact. All I know is what the CDPHE said about the study.
I think it was the trimesters that they were concerned about.
Okay.
She didn't know if they were there for all 3 trimesters.
Okay, but the point being, they were concerned about the validity of the study and thought that probably, I guess my take on that would be it bears more careful analysis or restudy of the data. And the fact about the trimesters is important because, again, as I mentioned earlier, if people have come into the region, into the area, having lived other places before, and we don't really understand what their exposures or experience was during those first and second trimesters, that might potentially have had more bearing on the birth outcomes than their experience when they were there living near the natural gas operation. So I think it doesn't mean that there isn't an issue that shouldn't bear studying or concern. I think, though, that the data as they were published probably shouldn't be considered as definitive or final.
Can I just add there that I think that Lisa McKinsey would want us to note that she reports association and correlation. She does not report causation. And I think it's a point she would want us to observe there, that that's a study of big populations and association and correlation, which is an invitation to further study, but it's not.
Absolutely, and I think that brings out the point that it's very often not the study itself that is the issue. It's how that study or the data from the study get interpreted and what filters the information is read through by the media, by the people who are reading it from one perspective or another, how they take that data and then use it after the study is published.
She's made that statement in the past.
Yeah, just an observation and a request. I noticed the governor had his Department of Health critique the health study, but had no critique of the economic studies. And I would request him to take a critical eye to the economic studies that have come out, because they haven't been peer reviewed, and there's a lot of assumptions in those studies that he should be concerned about. If he wants to criticize health studies, then be symmetry and look at the economic studies.
Okay, one last question on public health, and then some summing up questions. I have taken 22 questions and clumped them into one category, so we have, and then I'm fairly apologetic for some that we'll just pay attention to and try to get answers later for you. Okay, last one for you, Teresa. Are you familiar with the study in the Journal of Industrial Medicine showing that safe levels of many chemicals were set, the standards for that were set based, not based on health effects, but on what industry could achieve, and that 14% of the people studied experienced adverse symptoms at levels at or below the so-called safe levels of individual chemicals, and they didn't even consider additive or synergistic effects of multiple chemicals.
Well, I can answer that very quickly. I am not familiar with the study. I would be very happy to take a look at it and respond to you if someone could send me the reference.
Okay, so we have now two summing up questions. I'm going to go actually with the questions that I have clumped, which are all about passage of time and duration and what about the future. So for instance, don't you think the drillers in the 1980s also thought their technology was top-notch? What makes you think that in 30 years the unknown mistakes you are making will not cause a health or environment problem? What are the, as a structural engineer, I know that wells with casings, as you described, that the cement cracks either immediately or within 10 to 50 years. What happens at the point when many of the oil companies are long gone? What measures are taken when a well or facility is shut down? What is the impact? So a whole bunch of variations here on, is there a state requirement that once a field is finished, oil companies restore it to previous condition and remove equipment, which seems like a interesting.
On the side of the operational side of addresses a handful of those. Once the well's drilled and you've cemented and cased it, there is what's called a CBL, cement bond log. And that shows the integrity and the coverage of this to meet a minimum the state requires. You can do what are called, if you find a crack or you find a void where the cement ran out, if you will, through a fault or something that may be within your vertical part of your well, you can do what's called a top job and you pump the cement down. After the fact, while wells are producing, back at the surface you've got your wellhead, but obviously the cement's on the outside of that wellhead, so they're doing Braden head tests for gases on the back side of that wellhead. And if you see any gas whatsoever, obviously it's addressed immediately with cement on top of. So it is monitored and checked twice a year is the Braden head test. Yes, we are required to reclaim back to, that's where your production facility is, any above ground appurtenances, reseed, the full 9 yards of at the time that a well's plugged and abandoned and gone away. When you go to plug and abandon a well, and it addresses the question of the older wells and do you get communication from that zone back through an old well bore, you're cementing over the top with sacks of cement and you're cementing again at the surface. The state looks at anything that we're drilling horizontally through these older wells, and if the wells do not have the integrity that they think they need or they don't like the the plug and abandon report that maybe the well was plugged in the 90s or early 2000s, everything's documented and online. Then you have to go back in and re-enter that well and re-plug it, re-cement it prior to doing any horizontal activity within there. Is it foolproof? Probably not. You know, you've got, again, the backside of that. I do know that we just did a well down in Fort Lupton where it was an old vertical well, and the state did not like the cement plug and abandonment of the early 2000s of the old vertical well that was in that unit. We redid it, and then we monitored that. We left the hole open. The casing was cut off about 12 feet below surface, so we had to open everything up, find it, re-drill it out, plug it all over again, and then we had to monitor that well during our completion process within that unit to ensure that there was no communication from the new well that we're fracking to the old well that was abandoned years and years and years ago.
Can I just respond to that? I agree with the premise of the question, which is that it is imperfect. Maybe practices that were followed years ago that were thought to be safe practices have proven not to be. Cars that we drove 50 years ago were not really as safe as they are today. Technology is continuing to evolve. With that said, it's not a risk-free process. The industry is not risk-free. It's an industrial process. There are risks. Knowledge continues to evolve. So the question is, do we stop the activity until it's perfect, until we have to an absolute certainty the knowledge that there's no risk whatsoever, which would mean it'll never be done, or do we continue to evolve the technology and the regulatory practices to try to make it as safe as we think we can? And so there really is no answer to that question. If you're against oil and gas development, you're against oil and gas development. If you think that it's on a spectrum, it can be done in a way that's responsible and reasonably safe, but not risk-free, then that's your point of view.
One thing I would add is that one way to address these issues is to look at bonding. And the bonding system is woefully inadequate. You can, on a federal land, you can get a statewide bond for $25,000. And so what we're recommending is at least, they haven't been updated the amounts since the 50s, at least update them for inflation, and then make them site-specific. If you had site-specific bonding, then some of these unintended consequences that might happen down the line, or if companies go belly up, they got all these abandoned mines in the hills that no one's around to claim the responsibility, bonding is an economic instrument that can help address some of those issues.
Actually, we do have an environmental response fund.
Yeah, that too, but as an industry, we would not be opposed to that. I mean, it costs us today $40,000 to $60,000 to plug and abandon a well, and our bond's $60,000 as an operator, so that would cover one well. So it's really just insurance, and we pay a premium for it, and our banks back us on it. So it's like a line of credit, if you will.
Okay, so our last item, and I am missing quite a number of specific questions about the rights of a surface owner and the, I don't know what to do about that. We'll hang around afterwards. So, but I think we have gotten the ones that were appearing most often, and now I want to close with, well, first I want to note a question that nobody up here has any notion, but I do want to acknowledge that it was asked. Is Timnath planning to allow fracking? Well, you don't know that, so. But it is a concern in the room, and I think we should acknowledge that. But I want to go out on the question about the longer framework in time and decision-making under conditions of uncertainty. How do we conduct ourselves when we cannot know everything that we would like to know or would want to know with certainty? How do we live without? How do we think about these longer questions of durability, but also the resources of the of posterity? So I have several questions on that spirit, and many of them address the precautionary principle that we should not take actions if we're concerned that there is potential danger in those actions, that if we waited longer we might be able to make wiser choices. I would also, this pal keeps visiting me to say that the word prudent deserves more attention. So prudence, he's asked me to pay attention to this word, and I would like to point out this word means acting with or showing care and thought for the future. And the synonyms are lovely: wise, sensible, judicious, sagacious, shrewd, well-advised. So if you would like to speak in terms of the precautionary principle, you could do that, or in terms of prudence. And I'll just read three of these, or two of these questions that go to that. the precautionary principle, as in proving that fracking fluid is safe before using it, should this be a principle used in the industry? If not, why not? Well, that's just the framework of the precautionary principle with one particular example. And then a pretty sharp summation here. So it sounds like we all wait for the damage to be done instead of requiring oil and gas to show us that what they're doing is safe. Should we err on the side of caution? So if you could just, each of you, and I think Pete got shorted in time allocation. So do you want the opening statement or the closing statement for this last round?
Well, given how some lawyers talk quite a bit, I'll go first so I have some time. The approach we're talking about addresses a lot of that. We talk about controlling pace and scale. We talk about the precautionary principle being a guiding light of sort of, if we don't have data, that doesn't mean there isn't any harm. So for me, it's data intensive. It's baseline data. It's adaptive management borrowed from forestry, where you adjust the pace and scale based on monitoring results, and then have good monitoring, and then good economic instruments. I'd be raising the severance tax, I'd be raising royalty rates to pay for all this stuff, and then looking at bonding. So, the precautionary principle is really important for me, and it's part of the system that we sort of laid out there, because there are concerns about climate change, and there are concerns about species and communities, and slowing down and taking a little precaution is a good way of going about things.
You like the word prudence?
Prudence, I like prudence. That's good feeling,
Howard?
You really want to give me a chance?
I want you to keep your eyes on that clock
Yeah,
and
right.
look at Teresa and look at Craig.
So I'll say a few things. One is, I actually agree with Pete more than he thinks I do. I do think that industry needs to prove itself, needs to establish its bona fides, it needs to satisfy citizen concerns, stakeholder concerns. I think industry is better at that than it used to be, certainly than it was 20 years ago when I was really starting to focus on these issues. Industry's sensitivity is much higher. Industry's willingness to communicate is much greater. And frankly, this leads to my larger point, industry's willingness to negotiate and to implement precautionary principles is much greater. And so you as a community need to decide how you're going to approach this. And I would recommend several things. One is educate yourselves, not only by panels like this, have the COGCC come out here and the CDPHE and get the local operators, Extraction and Anadarko and Synergy and others who are around this area and who may have leases in the town to come here and talk to you and talk about what their plans are and use it as an opportunity for you to express your concerns to them. Learn about what's going on. Don't just wait until it happens. Take a proactive role. Industry is more than willing to negotiate what we call MOUs with local communities, which are memoranda of understandings, where you agree on what kinds of operating practices they're going to implement, what kinds of communication, what kinds of restrictions, setbacks, etc. Whatever you want to put in there, it's negotiable. Industry, at the end of the day, would much rather negotiate and come up with a certain way of proceeding so they've got predictability than to fight. Delay is not their friend. Fighting is not their friend. And so it's in your interest to negotiate. And MOUs are increasingly being used by local communities. Use the resources of the Colorado Municipal League. They're very experienced at dealing with this kind of stuff. There's lots of different things that local communities have done. Get representatives from other communities in here to talk to you about how they've approached it. Make sure you appoint your local government designee to the Oil and Gas Commission so that person is knowledgeable about what's going on in and around your community and can not only report to you but can report back to the commission when any permit application is filed on what your local concerns are and get protective provisions in any permits that are issued. There's lots of things you can do as a community to deal with this, to be proactive.
Okay, so thank you. Precautionary and prudence, long-term thinking.
I would just echo everything Howard just said. I mean, we, as industry, he framed it properly. I mean, we want to be transparent. We want to go ahead and work with, whether it's private landowner and/or municipal, things such as access and dust abatement and noise mitigation and light mitigation, and how's the traffic going to get there, and where are you going to pipe water from so we can cut down on trucks, and all those things can be prior proper planning. And you know, it's simply, again, and you touched on it earlier, you're living in a state that is regulated to the highest level of any state in the country, and you've got industry's attention greatly, and industry does want to, as he said, we're not looking for a fight, we're looking for an alternative. The not in my backyard is really hard at times. These wells need to be drilled. We're drilling up to 2 miles, so we're going out 9,000 feet. But that's, do we have all the leasehold, do we have all the mineral rights to that? Who are our working interest partners if we don't? Can we swap? There's a lot of horse trading that goes on for leasehold to be able to drill a majority of minerals in any unit that we drill. We don't want to drill something we only have a 50% interest in, because we have thousands of acres that we have 75, 85, 95% interest, so that's where our capital is going to go. So what will happen up here more than likely is I've got my little 160-acre lease, and Extraction has 720 acres around it, and they're going to come say, trade me that 160, I'll give you the 160 over here close to your unit, we can all be happy. And there's a lot of that happening in the industry right now. So you are going to get, you're going to get more than likely probably 1 or 2 operators that you need to focus in and have a relationship with to make sure that they operate to the level that your standards are. We are berming and noise mitigation and putting electric compressors on locations. We're doing everything we can to go ahead and mitigate the footprint and the impact that we're going to give you, how we get in there, how our trucks are going to get in there, and try to, you know, the least impact. It's going to impact somebody though. You know, it's, again, not in my backyard. Unfortunately, someone sitting here tonight, it's going to be in your backyard more than likely, and be educated and be ready to go ahead and work with that group. And if it just becomes an attorney calling, then we call our counsel and say, here, you got to deal with it. But if it's person to person through your town, most operators are more than willing to sit down and work through this without the fight and the expense of you having to go ahead and fight your way when state rule usually prevails.
Teresa?
Well, I guess I would say that we all live with a lot of uncertainty in our lives. That's unfortunately the nature of what we live with. I would say, coming back to the topic or the heading for this whole panel, we need to try and deal with that uncertainty, figure out what we know, what we don't know, and what we need to know. We need to try and balance or weigh the benefits and the risks. And we need to do that as individuals and as communities, because there are always benefits and risks. And what are we willing to accept, and what do we need to get when we take those risks? And to me, that's the precautionary principle at work, is what risks am I willing to accept for what benefits? We can paralyze ourselves with fear, and I don't think anybody wins in that situation. We don't win as individuals, and we don't win as communities. All of that said, I think I actually very strongly agree with a couple of comments that Pete made, in that I think one way that we can act very prudently, to use your term, as communities, is to do that baseline research, to understand what's the status of health, what are the health issues in our community, at what level, before anything happens. What is the status of our wells and our water table? Do the testing before any industrial operation happens in our community. I think it's expensive to do that, there's no doubt about it, but it's to the benefit not only of us as individuals and our communities, so that we know where we came from, and if anything happens, if a change occurs, we know it, and we have some baseline against which to judge that change. It's also to the benefit of the industry, because as Howard said, there are a lot of reasons, just to use water wells as an example, why water wells can become contaminated with components that are natural gas related, that may or may not be related to the actual drilling operations that's happening. But unless we knew what the status of that well was before the drilling started, we can't say for sure whether it was due to the fracking that took place last week or an unresolved issue from a decade ago that just happened to show up now. So I think it's worth asking the industry maybe to help participate in the cost of doing that baseline testing, and for us as taxpayers to be willing to pay the cost of that as well, because that's how we make those decisions prudently.
Okay.
I just have one.
Oh,
One idea. I didn't get a chance. Okay. I'm an economist, let me go short. One of the ideas we came up with to address the split estates was to increase severance tax, to put it into sort of a cost share to help local communities buy up the mineral rights. And this addresses a lot of people's perspectives. The mineral owner wants their money, well, let's put it in a pool and let's buy them. And then if we want to determine the cost share principle and my backyard, well, then we have a little bit more control over the pace and scale. So one of the ideas would be to have a cost share where communities, federal government, state government, and oil and gas community companies contribute to a fund to help solve the split estates. And then we have a little bit more certainty of what a community can do and how much they want to do in their backyard.
Well, okay. Thank you, everyone. I will say that it is genuinely a privilege. Emily and Adrian and Kurt and Ashley and Chris and I just feel very fortunate for the State of American West that we're given opportunities like this. I will apologize to the people I cut up. I think I've done that to you now, Phil, and a couple of other occasions. Yeah, that's my life, is cutting off Phil. So, but I'm apologizing for cutting them off. It is a privilege, and I think I will conclude with the State of American West limerick, which is about our neutrality, and it's an accurate autobiographical limerick. When you try to be neutral on fracking, you're a quarterback set up for sacking. You may assert and declare that you're going to be fair, but you still won't escape frequent whacking, which actually does not describe my experience this evening at all. Thank you very much for your graciousness and your kindness in having us here.